Good evening. I'd like to call to order the council meeting of May 21st, 2024. Can everyone that can stand, please stand for the playing of the national anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Carton brasse porter le pays, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Grimsby is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendoronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? Seeing none, can I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Frank, second by Councillor Bradsey. Moved by Councillor Frank, second by Councillor Bradsey. Resolved that the May 21st, 2024 council meeting agenda be approved. All in favor? That's carried. Our first presentation is from the Niagara region regarding an update on the Niagara Escarpment Crossing project. Who's here tonight? Frank, please come to the podium.
Okay, hello, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening to discuss the Niagara Escarpment Crossing. My name is Frank Tassoni. I'm the Director of Transportation Services at Niagara Region, and tonight I have with me Scott Fraser, the Associate Director of Transportation Planning, and Majid El-Madoun, the Manager of Transportation Planning. Well, I expect that many of you are already familiar with this initiative. For those of you that are coming at this for the first time, the Niagara Escarpment Crossing is a proposed new road in West Niagara that would look to improve goods movement and capacity and redirect truck traffic away from residential areas such as downtown Grimsby and Beamsville. I'd like to note that this differs from the Niagara GTA to Hamilton to West Niagara corridor. That would connect the GTA to the border. That's a different initiative that we have in the planning stages and will be discussed further in our next Transportation Master Plan update. Tonight's presentation is about consultation and hearing your feedback. We know that this project has a lot of interest in Grimsby to both council and the residents of the town. And that is reflected in the motion that was passed by Grimsby Council this past December. And so we're here tonight to provide an update and address some of your most common concerns and the most common questions that we've heard thus far. And we would like to incorporate your input as we look to move this project forward in the coming months. So with that in mind, tonight we plan to cover a refresher on why the project is being considered, a summary of some of the history and past planning activities, discuss the comprehensive environmental assessment process and how it differs from the more familiar municipal class environmental assessment process and the work that has been completed on the terms of reference to date, and discuss what comes next, including our ongoing consultation program. I'm now going to turn things over to Scott Fraser to take us through some of those details.
Thanks, Frank. Here we go, one more slide too, thanks. So why is the region considering a new road in West Niagara? The goal of the project is to consider a new north-south link between the QEW and Highway 20, one that would be more suitable for truck traffic than the existing crossings of the escarpment, such as Regional Road 12 here in Grimsby, Mountain, and Christie, and Regional Road 18, Mountain Street and Ontario in Beamsville. These existing crossings have challenges that make them undesirable for truck traffic, including steep grades, limited room for trucks to make turns, and proximity to residential neighborhoods. The creation of a new link would address many of those concerns by redirecting truck traffic away from those crossings, improving both the region's goods movement capacity as well as safety and quality of life in these communities. So the idea of a new road in West Niagara is one that's been considered before. One of the most common questions we received on this project is, why is this study necessary, given the past planning that has occurred around this project? So to address this, I think it's important to quickly recap some of that activity. In 2016, Regional Council received a report that identified that an extension of Bartlett Avenue and the Park Road corridor was the preferred route for this road, and that it be advanced as a municipal Class C environmental assessment. That recommendation was also reflected in the region's transportation master plan at the time. However, in preparation for that work, staff identified that it was unlikely the project would be successfully completed if moved forward as a Class EA. And so the primary challenges included obtaining necessary approvals from the Niagara Escarpment Commission and risk of objections on the environmental impacts to the project. And so between 2017 and 18, staff investigated alternative ways to move the project forward, arriving at the recommendation of a comprehensive environmental assessment in 2020. What's important to take away from the history here is that while those previous studies provide useful background to the project, the CEA that we are undertaking now represents a new planning initiative. In particular, those previous studies, including the 2016 Class C EA, were not fully completed or filed with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks at the time. So what is a comprehensive environmental assessment, and how does it differ from the normal process the region follows for most roads projects? The CEA approach is used when a project is anticipated to require an enhanced level of consultation due to the scale of the project and the associated environmental impacts. A CEA is carried out in two phases. First, we develop what is known as the terms of reference for the project. And that's really the roadmap where we lay out and get feedback in advance on the scope, the studies, and the work plans to be conducted in phase two, the full environmental assessment. That allows us to discuss upfront with local municipalities, the Niagara Escarpment Commission, Ministry of the Environment, Indigenous communities, and the public before we begin the EA on what needs to be considered as part of that work. And so where we are at is staff have prepared the first draft of the terms of reference and are ready to begin the active consultation phase on this project. We'll be circulating the draft terms of reference to everybody I listed a moment ago for their review and feedback over the coming weeks, beginning on May 30th. In terms of what's included in a terms of reference, as I mentioned, it's about setting the roadmap for how the future environmental assessment will be completed, and that includes setting out the goals and objectives for the project, the study area and alternatives, the technical work plan, and the future consultation plan on the EA itself. So in terms of those technical work plans, they cover a wide range of studies. I won't read the full list from the screen, but they cover the full spectrum of transportation, environmental, social, and financial factors. There are two particular areas of the terms of reference that I wanted to highlight for you tonight. First, the alternatives to be considered. As you'll note, we're proposing 4 alternatives be considered: the do nothing or base case alternative, implement additional traffic management measures on the existing crossings of Ontario and Christie Street, extend Bartlett Avenue and utilize the Park Road corridor as was originally identified in the TMP, or a fourth alternative of constructing a new corridor somewhere between Grimsby and Beamsville. Second being the proposed study area. Here I'll note what you'll see on the screen is larger than the study area that was included in the original notice of commencement for this project. And the reason for the larger study area is to incorporate all of the alternatives that I just discussed, and in particular, alternative 2, where we want to examine and look at the existing crossings to demonstrate that additional incremental improvements to those crossings will not ultimately address the safety concerns that we've noted. Much of the feedback we've received on this project so far has been focused on these two components and why we're considering alternatives other than Bartlett Avenue. As I mentioned earlier, this comprehensive environmental assessment represents a new planning initiative, and as such must investigate and demonstrate both the need for a new escarpment crossing, as well that other alternative solutions are not feasible. That includes further improving the other existing road, regional crossings, or that alignments other than Bartlett Avenue would be suitable. Investigating and demonstrating those two factors will be key criteria that the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, as well as the Niagara Escarpment Commission look to when approving this project in the future. A CEA that predetermines a preferred outcome without undertaking due diligence to demonstrate the best outcome, or one that fails to consider impact to the surrounding communities or the environment, is unlikely to be acceptable to those agencies. So while the CEA may reach many of the same conclusions as the previous studies, it's important that it consider this wider area and re-demonstrate those conclusions as part of this planning exercise. So in terms of what comes next, we're beginning the consultation phase on the terms of reference. A number of interested parties have been consulted in the early development of that terms of reference, but we are now moving that and expanding that activity. So in terms of timelines, we've shared this update with the Region's Public Works Committee on May 7th, and will be considered by full council on Thursday night, the 23rd. We've met with Lincoln Council on the 15th last week, and of course are here before you tonight. Next week, on Monday, we will be at West Lincoln Council, and then a public information center is going to be held at the West Niagara Fairgrounds on the next Wednesday, the 29th. As I mentioned, starting on May 30th, we'll be sharing the draft terms of reference on the Region website and inviting all interested parties to comment and review on those documents over 6 weeks into mid-July. The project team will be aggregating feedback from all of these activities, revising the terms of reference, and subject to what we hear from everybody over the coming weeks, look to file the terms of reference with the minister later this fall. So with that, I'll wrap the presentation, and I welcome any questions.
Great, thank you for your presentation, Frank and Scott. Questions from council? Councillor Howe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Mr. Fraser, probably for you. All of the work that was done, 2016, 2017, 2018, is there anything that's relative, or does that you start from ground zero again?
So there's a lot, sorry, through the mayor, there's a lot through that will be relevant to the study, and those will all be considered as background information as part of this proposal, or as part of this planning initiative. Some of that work will have to be reconfirmed, as I mentioned, or an example is the traffic analysis. That traffic analysis at the time would have looked at information from 2014. We are now 10 years past that point. And so it will take a similar approach to traffic analysis that was used in those previous studies, but will be updated with more recent information.
Okay, if I can. And the ordinary citizen of all the communities, they're going to have that open house up at the fairgrounds?
Yes.
And what do you foresee down the road for individual input or access into the system?
So through the mayor, so as part of the terms of reference, because we're going through this two-phased approach where we set it out in advance, that includes a detailed plan for how we will consult on the project itself in the future. And so that will include additional public information centers throughout that process, probably 3 or more as we develop the environmental assessment itself, as well as engagement with individual concerned citizen groups, with Indigenous communities, with utilities, with local area municipalities. Again, it will be laid out in that consultation plan that you will see starting on May 30th.
If I can, one more. Mr. Tassoni, is the workforce going to be in place? Once we finish this, are they going to be let off into other things, or are we going to transition right into hopefully, the full-blown EA, I think is the proper term, I think. Is the horsepower going to be there for us?
Yeah, so through the mayor, you know, in the bigger scheme of how this will likely play out, I think it's reasonable to expect that we would not be able to afford the full construction of this project alone as a region. We'll be looking for support from the provincial and federal government to assist in this project. So we will have the horsepower on the ground to get the study complete, and then we would look to be shovel-ready to be able to capitalize on any programs that come down the road. As you're likely aware, most programs that get released by the feds in the province require projects to be shovel-ready. And so we're trying to position ourselves in a manner that allows us to capitalize on those opportunities when they arise.
Thank you.
Councillor DeVoley.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. A question for our presenters this evening. And I realize there's not a lot of flesh around some of these options already, but I would like to just ask you to expand a bit more on option number 4, constructing a new corridor between Grimsby and Beamsville. So number 3, for example, or number 2, those are currently regional roads, right? So when you think of option number 4, are you considering any specific roads, or would this be a new road that theoretically the region would need to acquire that would then go north-south? Or can you just expand more on what you mean by that 4th option?
Thank you, through the mayor. So option 4, and you'll see this laid out in the full terms of reference, that it defines a corridor that's approximately 2 kilometers wide, which is roughly the area between New High School and the west edge of Beamsville. It's not specific on any specific sections of road. It would consider any combination of net new road corridors, reutilizing or repurposing sections of the existing road network in that area, or whatever other alternatives might be feasible. The reason why we've left that as open as it is at this stage is because any alternative in that area would have to consider how to interface with the QEW and require a net new interchange at the QEW. And we think that that's ultimately a significant factor in moving that option forward and evaluating that as an option. So we will, as we conduct the environmental assessment, need to determine, is that a feasible option for us? And then look at that in the context of whether, if that's a no-go, then a lot of the other considerations aren't as relevant when we get beyond that stage with that alternative.
So if I understand this correctly, it could be any piece, any property between Grimsby and Beamsville, I will say, to use the old term, Beamsville, that could come up for consideration. So how will you even know which property you're thinking about? Is there a short list already, I guess, that you're going to be looking for input on, or that you're going to ask the consultants to comment on?
So through the mayor. So the evaluation will go through 2 phases. So there's first the determination of the preferred alternative, and that's where we will look at one of those 4 options at a high level to determine whether or not any of them are a clear preferred outcome and alternative. Once that's established during the EA, we then look at alternative methods for carrying out the preferred alternative, to get into the jargon on it. And so it's the alternative method stage that then gets to that more increased level of detail of specific routes and specific property assessments and the like. So we have to first make the higher level determination at the alternatives stage as to which of the 4 that I referenced is the preferred alternative. And then if one of them is identified at a high level, we would go to that second level of detail at the alternative methods stage of the environmental assessment.
And so one last question related to this. So there are criteria already that you have developed under the terms of reference to evaluate each of these 4 options, I assume? And are you able to share those with us, or that will be coming to our staff?
Correct. So through the mayor, that will be coming to your staff as part of the full terms of reference document on May 30th.
Councillor DeFlavio.
Thanks, Mayor. Through you. Mr. Tassone mentioned that the cost couldn't be funded by Niagara taxpayers alone, which is pretty clear. You also mentioned the possibility of a new interchange from the highway, which I mean, the last estimate that I saw for this project was $150 million, and there's no way that with a new interchange from the highway, it would be $1 billion project then. Like, the most recent highway interchanges that I've seen construction costs for were, like $300 million just for the interchange construction. So that's, are we going to triage it? How is staff going, are you going to say this option is great? This is the perfect option, but the cost is so high that it would be overwhelming it would be the biggest project that the Niagara region's ever done from a financial perspective, even with co-funding from the province and from the feds. So if you can speak to how that is going to look like, what that decision is going to look like.
Yeah, through the mayor, I think you've raised a really good point, and your question is a very good one. Will cost and some of the prohibitive costs of a new interchange likely guide where that alignment will be? That's very likely. You're correct in that new interchanges on the 400 series highway on a QEW are very expensive. The last one that we looked at was at 3rd Avenue by the St. Catharines Hospital. And, once we were through that process and we understood that the ministry would not cost share, we simply didn't build it. It wasn't feasible. So, yeah, I think to say triage, maybe not to that extent, but how we connect to the QEW will have a major impact on which alignment is successful in this process.
So through you, Mayor, further to that then, we know that West Lincoln is probably going to be the fastest growing municipality out of the three. It is the one with the least land in the Greenbelt, so has the highest potential for expansion. So the project makes sense. You talked about, the old numbers not being valid because of the traffic study that was done back then and it being updated. Does this study consider the maximum potential growth for West Lincoln? It's not going to be based on current numbers. I'm hoping it's going to be based on potential growth.
Yeah, and to answer that question through the mayor, there's another study that's being undertaken. So West Lincoln conducted a secondary planning exercise that looked at what they consider to be the Smithville bypass, which is routing truck traffic around downtown Smithville. The intention is that the alignment that this corridor takes will connect to the Smithville bypass, which will then create a goods movement corridor from the QEW to Smithville.
Through you, Mayor. So thank you for all of that. So the scope of this project could potentially be, it could go from, a 2-lane road that is an enhancement of Bartlett Avenue to an expressway type situation, which is an exit from the highway. Like I think of like the Red Hill in Hamilton, which goes through an important biodiversity area and probably would never be built again today if that land wasn't left. So from an environmental perspective, how restrictive, what are the chances of the Niagara Escarpment Commission that is traditionally very restrictive on changes to the Niagara Escarpment area, approving a large-scale project where there might be, like large-scale destruction of the escarpment to make a large crossing? You're going to have to dynamite. I think of places like, it's massive. There's very few gradual entrances to the escarpment in West Niagara. So the only thing I could think of is something similar to Centennial Parkway in Hamilton, where, again, done in the 1950s, they just took dynamite and blew a hole in the side of the mountain, but that's not the way that things are done anymore. So what's that going to look like? And if that's not something you can answer, I understand that. But through you, Mayor, if you have an idea of if that sort of thing has happened in other municipalities, anything like that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and so through the mayor, that is the whole intent of the study. We recognize that the environmental impacts will be a large part of the undertaking. And at the end of the study, if the Niagara Escarpment Commission does not support what we've done and support the need and justification for this crossing, they simply won't approve it. And so part of the alternatives that you've seen tonight are looking at improvements to existing crossings and then looking at a range of different areas that will demonstrate to the NEC that we've actually done our due diligence and there isn't a better option on the table that can effectively move goods up and down the escarpment to the level that needs to happen in Niagara with the growth that we're seeing. And so we expect that the NEC will be very hard on us about improving existing crossings and looking at the improvements that have already been made to the existing crossings to demonstrate that that is not sufficient to address the issues that we currently have shown with those crossings. And so to answer your question, yes, there's going to be a very, very large environmental component to this that will likely be one of the biggest hurdles that we have to jump. And that's why we're doing this rigorous process, is to be able to conduct the studies and have the minister, at the end of the day, approve a framework that will prove to the NEC that the need and justification for the project is there. Anything short of being able to prove that will likely not be approved.
Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. First, I just want to thank you guys for the presentation. I am very excited to see this project getting some steam. I just wanted to kind of touch on one of the points a fellow councillor brought up about the viability of interchanging with the Bartlett, because as we know, the intersection there is kind of not your typical 400 series intersection as it is, which is largely impacted by how close the train is to Bartlett. So how granular have we looked at Bartlett having a seamless transition to the 400 series highway? And I just wanted to say that I also, if it was more viable, that to build a new extension that ended up in Beamsville, I still think we see all the reduction from trucks in our downtown. So for me, it's 3 or 4. I'm fine either or. Just would really much like to see this extension happen. Just your thoughts on the train in Bartlett.
So thank you, through the mayor. So yes, as part of alternative 3, which would look to extend Bartlett Avenue, we will have to look at the existing interchange at Bartlett Avenue and identify what improvements or enhancements may be necessary to support future growth in truck traffic using that interchange. I think, as you know, it's got a very tight button hook kind of alignment, we referred to it there, that does serve truck traffic today. But as part of the alternative analysis for that, we will look at what additional improvements to that alignment are either feasible or necessary as part of that alternative, should it be the recommended alternative.
Thank you, and look forward to seeing the 2 alternatives that come.
Councillor Charwa, then Councillor Bard.
And through Mayor Jordan, thank you. You had mentioned you went to Lincoln recently. I'm just interested if you could just let us know about what their concerns were, what the consensus was in Lincoln.
So through the mayor, when we were complete our presentation in Lincoln, they asked several questions that we answered. When that was all done, they did pass a motion in support of the study moving forward, and also a motion that their preference is for Park and Bartlett to be the preferred alignment of the escarpment crossing. So they were supportive of the study going forward, and they wanted us to know that that was their preference.
Okay, through you, Mayor, can you just elaborate on why they chose that, or if you could?
I think that in general, they feel that a lot of the work that has been done previously had alluded to that being the preferred alignment. They feel that some of those studies were, in their opinion, a lot further ahead than we maybe think they were. And I think there was maybe a thought there that some of those studies carried approval status. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and they will inform our current study. But they're really thinking that that is the alignment that they prefer. And I think there's also an undertone that they prefer not to see the alignment be in the Mountain View area in their municipality.
Councillor Barty.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to be a little more critical. I always understood that the EA was in progress. So to find out that between 2016 and 2024, 8 years, we've not really made any progress. And that's really disappointing for something that's so important. So when I look at the 4 options you present, do nothing, well, I don't think do nothing's an option. I don't think do nothing was an option in 2016 either. Implement additional traffic management measures, that's something that you can do regardless and should be doing, right? Extend Bartlett Avenue and utilize the Park Road corridor. I'm curious to see how you would move that over from Bartlett over to Park, because Park is very steep too. It's not as bad as Wolverton, but it's got quite a significant grade. And then constructing a new corridor, I don't think is financially feasible. So I sit here and I think, why are we going through all of this when really logic would dictate only some version of option 3, which is what we talked about back in 2016, is really the viable one to pursue. So I'm kind of left at a loss here. Like I'm really surprised, and that we're basically starting again after 8 years of doing this, or thinking we were doing this, or being given the impression it was being done. So what is the timeline now for this going forward?
Yeah, through the mayor, and so I'd like to, I think it's a good time for me to address what's happened in the past, because I think it's important to recognize that the staff that were in place at that time that made those decisions made them for a reason. And although there was a study that was started at the time, it was being undertaken as a Class C, municipal class environmental assessment. And at the time, my understanding is that staff felt that when they completed some of that work, that it just would not have had enough meat on it for the approval agencies to go ahead and approve that study.
If I may stop you there, why then was that not communicated to the municipality? Because I think we were all under the impression that the EA was underway.
And so through the mayor, when the decisions were made, which was in 2020, that was brought back to regional council, and council was informed that we were going to stop the Schedule C process, and we were going to embark on at the time, what was called an individual EA, which is now called the comprehensive environmental assessment.
That was 4 years ago.
Correct. At that time, that was the direction that we started down, and it's taken us to this point to retain a consultant and to get this far down the road with respect to having the terms of reference drafted. This is not a very fast process. This is likely going to take another 2 to 3 years by the time the study is complete. The reason why this process takes this long is because it's very rigorous, and it needs to be that rigorous in order for us to obtain approvals once it's all said and done. So I can't comment on the actions of staff that made those decisions at that time. However, I do trust that they had good rationale for why they stopped the process at the time, and I think the road that we're on now is the right one to get us across the finish line at the end of the day.
Well, I can only ask then that this be given the highest priority, because the traffic on Mountain, the truck traffic, it's not safe. We've had accidents, we've had issues. We've got, sometimes it's been counted 95 trucks an hour going up there. It's not feasible. So this should be made a priority at the region. That's all I can comment on.
Yeah, and through the mayor, I have all the faith in my team. I have some fantastic people that I work with, my colleagues here, that are going to be undertaking the study and seeing it through. I have every bit of confidence that they're going to get the study done as quickly as they can. I think you point out something really important, that safety is a factor here. And I know that the first go-around, the Escarpment Commission did not really consider safety. They were more considerate of volume and the fact that there's still capacity with respect to volume. And we have to do our best to show them through this process that safety is a major contributing factor and it's not just about volume. So it's a good point that you've made. I'm 100% confident that we have the right people running the project this time around to get it across the finish line, and I'm sure that they're going to do that as expeditiously as possible. And I'll be supporting that along the way.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your presentation. Can I have a mover and seconder to receive the presentation? Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor Vardy. Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor Vardy. Resolved that the presentation from Niagara Region be received. All in favor? That's carried. So there is a resolution, and I'll read it, and we can certainly debate it. Resolved that Council for the Town of Grimsby endorse the region undertake the necessary phases of the municipal class environmental assessment process to develop a preferred alignment and preliminary design, and that Council for the Town of Grimsby reaffirms its support for the Grimsby-Bartlett Avenue extension as the preferred route. So that's what's on the floor. So questions or comments? Councillor Bradzi?
Through you, Mayor. I like it the way it is. Could we all maybe just add that should it be more feasible for number 4 to end up being that we support another route as well?
Yeah, we could certainly ask either Frank or Scott to comment on that, like whether we can pick 2, or do you want direction as 1?
Yeah, and through the mayor, I think ultimately it's at council's discretion on what you want to support. As I mentioned, Lincoln showed their support for the Park Bartlett extension being their preference. However, there would be nothing wrong with this council deciding that either Park Bartlett or another alignment be acceptable to you. So I don't think that you can make a mistake either way. I think what we're really hearing from you is that you're supportive of the study and you'd like to see it move forward as quickly as possible. Regardless of where the alignment is, you'd like to see another crossing of the escarpment. And so I'll leave that to council.
Well, what I take from you and what I take from the questions there is if the study has a better preferred route, I don't think it's in our best interest to pick one before the study. To me, it seems like we should follow the way of the study and wait till the study reveals what's the best. So.
Yeah, and through the mayor, I would concur that, that is the way that it would be taken. Obviously, your recommendation here is simply your opinion of the matter. The study will dictate where the crossing goes. Your motion tonight would simply be added to the study file as your opinion of the matter at this time.
Councillor Sharwa.
Through Mayor Jordan, thank you. I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I feel like if we don't take a position that the study could favor one route, that maybe we won't necessarily favor later. So I don't know. For those of you, I'm still favoring the Park Road Bartlett. So I don't know if we could take a vote on that and then maybe go to the second one.
Yeah, and I'd just like to further add that I think the study's not supposed to be unbiased. So I think if council picks one or the other, I don't think that should preconceive a study to have a result that's a certain way. Councillor DeFlavio.
Yeah, I think removing any choice is it would be the best route. Just, we want to see the study done as quickly as possible and completed. from a personal perspective, I don't know what that Bartlett Road extension is going to look like. So depending on the different choices that come forward, I might support it and I might not. So I'm not even comfortable saying that I'm in favor of that, because I don't know if that requires a destruction of a massive part of the Niagara Escarpment, or if it's, you know, you've talked about a tunnel in the past. There's lots of different options for that. What is that going to look like? We don't know what that actually is yet. So how can we put it into writing that we favor something that we don't know? We don't actually know what that crossing looks like. So I'm not comfortable making a choice. I think the environmental assessment will tell us what the best choice is. That's the whole point of it. I think that's what you were trying to say as well. So,
Councillor Frake.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Thanks for the presentation, guys. I too, when I look at the map you've provided here and look at the shaded area, it seems to me that the path of least resistance, the path of least costs, from my little knowledge that I have of environmental assessments and transportation and traffic, having lived in it, there's less disruption to the escarpment if you take the route that's already started, which is the Bartlett Avenue extension. As much as I'd like to endorse that as council tonight, that is the one we want to take. Being that you introduce the possibility of a choice, I wouldn't mind seeing that second choice and what it would look like. But having said that, what would be if you decided to go with both consultations on each one of these separately, what's a time frame for a consultation? Would you do them separately, together? I mean, how long would it take to do one or the other, or just one, or both? I mean, because I think this has been so long overdue, and I mean, I know that this Bartlett extension was supposed to have been completed many years ago, way before 2016, but somehow it got stopped, and it's ended just over on the other side of Main Street. So, Frank, if you don't mind speaking to that,
Yeah, and maybe if I could just advise council that you're under no obligation to select your preference at this point. We are at the stage of the project where we're drafting the terms of reference that will give us the framework for how we're going to undertake the study. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this council reserving its opportunity to comment on what they would prefer to see for a later time when you actually see what the options are. At this point, Lincoln made that motion because they were had a very strong opinion that they didn't want to see it on another one of their corridors, being Mountain View. So they put that motion forward to let us know that, you know, regardless of what happens in the study, they don't want to see it on Mountain View. And so it's not incumbent upon this council to make that determination tonight. And if you're uncomfortable doing that, as I think it's already been alluded to, this would simply inform the study. It's not that will make or break where the alignment ends up being. The study will guide that. So hopefully that provides you with a little bit of guidance that it's not necessary for you to support an alignment at this point. Simply supporting the project moving forward at this point would be adequate.
So, but you didn't answer my question. What is the time frame you put on doing the environmental assessment of these two routes? The problem I have is this has been so long overdue and so much needed because, you know, the traffic up and down the mountain is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. It really is seriously, as Councillor Vardy alluded to, a serious safety issue. But outside of that, this is like probably close to 20 years overdue, never mind 4 years or 8 years overdue. So how long will it take to do these studies, number one? Once the study is complete and we've decided on which one we're going to take, how long after that before we see it shovel in the ground, kind of speak, as we use around here?
So through the mayor, right now we're estimating that the study will take approximately 2 years. That could easily be extended given the sensitivity of the project. The shovel in the ground date will all be dependent on when funds are available through the province and the federal government. As I'd mentioned earlier, this is unlikely to go ahead with only regional funding. So we would be, waiting for some type of program to be available that we can capitalize on some grant funds for.
So it's going to be long beyond the term of this council. You're probably talking 3 years, probably 6+ years before we even see anything.
I would say that that's likely being very ambitious.
Anyways, I think I will endorse Councillor Barasi's idea. I think we need to see the choice, what the choices look like. I don't think we want to shoot ourselves in the foot and be too myopic, even though I do lean towards the Bartlett Avenue extension, but seeing the choice, I think it would be wise. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just read the first part of the resolution, and then we'll get a mover and seconder. Resolve that council for the town of Grimsby endorse the region undertake the necessary phases of the municipal class environmental assessment process to develop a preferred alignment and preliminary design. So we need a mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Howe, second by Councillor DeVoldy. Moved by Councillor Howe, second by Councillor DeVoldy. Resolved that council for the town of Grimsby endorse that the region undertake the necessary phases of the municipal class environmental assessment process to develop a preferred alignment and preliminary design. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Up next, our presentation from Hemson Consulting on the community benefit charge strategy. Jackie, please come to the podium.
Good evening. It's great to be here before council this evening. I do have a presentation that I was wondering if that would be brought up on the screen. Excellent. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Hall. I'm a consultant or an associate with Hemson Consulting, and we are the firm that has been retained to complete a community benefits charges strategy and associated bylaw for the town. If we go to the next slide. Just quickly, what I'd like to do over the next 15 minutes or so is to provide a bit of an overview of what community benefits charges are and talk about the legislative requirements of the Planning Act and in order to calculate these rates. I'll also talk about a few critical inputs to the calculation, which includes the development forecast or the anticipated growth over the 10-year planning horizon that we're using for the purposes of the strategy, as well as a summary of the capital projects that we've identified for the purposes of the CBC exercise. As many of you might be surprised to learn throughout the presentation, the CBC revenues that we are calculating are quite limited compared to other revenue sources that municipalities have, such as development charges. And so we certainly will be talking a little bit about those estimates and what we anticipate it to look like over the next 10 years. Finally, we'll wrap up with next steps and talk about where we're going with respect to the strategy and implementing the bylaw. Next slide. Here in Ontario, we've entered an era of a new framework for funding growth-related capital. And so what I mean by growth-related capital infrastructure is net new infrastructure that is being added to a municipality. We are not looking at things such as operating or maintenance costs related to infrastructure. This is strictly funding new capital assets. And so what the Government of Ontario has essentially created is 3 revenue tools that municipalities can rely upon in order to fund this type of infrastructure. The first being development charges. The town has a very well-established development charge regime, and through that revenue tool, you're able to collect for a number of different services that are prescribed through the legislation, and essentially they're charged on a per unit basis for residential uses and a per square meter or square foot basis for non-residential. The focus of this exercise, however, is on the community benefits charges. So this is a very limited revenue tool that is related to higher density development, and I'll get into that in a couple of slides. We also have parkland dedication, and that is typically applied as a standard rate, 5% for residential, 2% for non-residential. However, if the rate is not applied and land cannot be dedicated, cash and lieu options are also available. All three of these revenue tools are appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And the important thing is that for some of these tools, there can be overlap, but we cannot double dip or effectively recover the same costs through these revenue sources. Next slide. So touching quickly on the legislation. So the community benefits charges regime is enabled through the Planning Act legislation. Some of you might be familiar with what we called the old Section 37, which was heightened density bonusing. That's now been removed. That no longer applies through the Planning Act. There still are some transition provisions. So previous agreements that were struck, certainly there still are those agreements that are in play. However, going forward, that section of the legislation has effectively been removed. It's now been replaced by our CBCs. So once again, a tool to fund growth-related capital. And really, it was in response to pushback that the province received from the development industry about concerns that Section 37 contributions were not being done in a way that was very transparent to the industry. Certain services that were being used to fund it, there was some concerns about that. So the province has come up with a new regime for municipalities. In-kind contributions are certainly permitted, so you can allow credits to be provided if a developer were to construct infrastructure on behalf of the town. And unlike development charges where we're continuously, or probably feels like continuously, updating the background studies as the bylaws expired every 5 years, they now expire every 10. Once the CBC bylaw is in place, it does not expire. However, we are required to review it every 5 years. So effectively, the bylaw can continue in perpetuity so long as we feel that it's justifiable to keep it in place. Next slide. So the way in which the legislation is set up is that only local or single-tier municipalities can have a CBC. And a CBC is limited to a very specific type of development. So it can only be levied against higher density development that has 5 or more stories and 10 or more residential units. Before a municipality can pass a bylaw, we have to create a strategy. And that strategy looks very similar to a development charges background study. It's actually been attached to the agenda this evening, the draft strategy that we've prepared. And the legislation does not prescribe a rate structure for the CBCs. So the most common structure we see is a percentage of a land value, which I'll get into in a second. You can certainly look at doing a per unit rate, a per square footage rate, or net developable hectare, but the overwhelming number of majorities that have CBCs are using a percentage of land value. And the reason for that is that the regulations to the Planning Act set the CBCs or cap it at 4% of the land value. And it's very important to note when that land value is determined. It's determined the day before the first building permit is issued. That effectively reflects the heightened density that is permitted on that particular site, because as heightened density increases, so does land value. Next slide. So I mentioned this a few times, CBCs can fund essentially any growth-related capital costs. Unlike the Development Charges Act, there isn't a prescribed list of services. It's quite a far-reaching revenue tool that we can use. We can overlap with DC services. We can include eligible DC services in the CBC, but we cannot double count the same projects. And same with parkland acquisition, which is done under Section 42. There's also a number of services now that are ineligible for development charges, such as parking services. Certainly that makes a lot of sense to bring it into the fold for CBCs because a municipality can no longer fund parking through development charges. So what we've done through this exercise is we've identified various categories for CBC infrastructure. We've met with staff in order to come up with these categories. And so what we've landed on is the box to the right-hand side that you see on the slide here. So certainly growth-related studies, parking services, Roads and related infrastructure, particularly active transportation, bridges, certainly we feel that there is servicing demands that are driven by higher density development and that CBCs could be used to fund a portion of that infrastructure. The administration of the program itself is certainly eligible and a service we're recommending be brought forward. Fire services, that is a DC eligible service. However, the town has maxed out its DC funding for fire. And so the shares of projects that are over and above the DC funding can certainly be brought into the CBC analysis and considered for recovery. As well, we've developed a category for parkland and community facilities. We've also grouped together public art, heritage culture, and community infrastructure. Climate change initiatives, we know the town is embarking on its new official plan, and climate change is certainly an important part of that. So we brought that into the fold, and affordable housing as well. Now, the legislation does require us to address what we call a nexus test between the servicing, so the capital infrastructure, and the needs arising from development. And so we can only use CBCs to fund infrastructure that is required to service buildings that have 5 or more stories or 10 or more residential units. So it's a bit of an interesting calculation, and I'll walk you through how we do that. But essentially, we have to create or meet that nexus test where we just can't recover any infrastructure through the CBCs. We have to say, yes, this is related to higher density development, and therefore we're going to fund it through this revenue source. Next slide. This is a very high-level schematic that shows essentially what the legislation requires us to do in order to arrive at the CBC rates. So we have to look at the anticipated development in the town over the next 10 years. We could look at other planning horizons, but for most of the CBC strategies we've used a 10-year planning horizon. We then look at the growth-related capital needs, so all those categories I just went through on the previous slide. The legislation, very similar to development charges, requires us to make a whole host of adjustments and reductions to account for things like benefit to existing development. So any shares of projects that will benefit existing residents in the town or existing employees in the town, we have to net that off. If there's other funding sources from development charges, cash in lieu of parkland, these sort of anticipated grants, all of that has to come off as well. After we make those adjustments, we arrive at what we would call our costs that are eligible for CBC recovery, and then we have to attribute it to development that is 5 or more stories and 10 or more residential units. Next slide. So this slide may pertain more to staff than it does council, but certainly there is implementation and administration considerations when we're bringing this forward. So consultation is required but is not defined by the legislation. And so what we are recommending as part of this process, and is similar to what we've done in other municipalities as well, is we are recommending that we hold one public meeting. We also are planning to have a information session with development industry stakeholders, so they're well informed of the process and aware of what we're proposing to do with the CBC strategy. Only one CBC bylaw is allowed. So once we have this in place, we won't be bringing forward other analysis for other bylaws. It's just going to be all dealt with through one single bylaw. Once that bylaw is passed, we do have to issue a notice of passage, which is very similar to the development charges study process. And there is the right of the public to appeal the bylaw to the Ontario Land Tribunal. With respect to administration and reporting, the CBCs are a bit unique in that we establish what we call a special account. So development charges, as you may be aware, we set up reserve funds for all the various services. So library goes to library, fire goes to fire. For CBCs, we have one pot of money called the special account. And so council can determine how that money is spent or allocated within any given year. You can prioritize one service, you could prioritize multiple services. It really does have quite a bit of flexibility, which is a good thing. In a calendar year, however, a municipality shall spend or allocate being the key word. You don't have to spend this money, but you have to earmark at least 60% of that special account. That's very easy to do. I'm not aware of any municipality that has had issues doing that, especially with all the growth pressures that we know that the town is experiencing. So certainly I don't think that will be an issue. The town also has to maintain a list of three appraisers in case there is a dispute with land appraisals. It's simply a list that the town maintains and will pull upon if that ever happens. And you're also required to produce an annual report showing the opening and closing balances, very similar to the treasurer's statement that is prepared as part of the DC reserve balances. Next slide. So the strategy that's been attached to the agenda, it includes all of these things that are listed on the slide here that are required through the legislation. So we have to forecast development and redevelopment on lands for which the CBCs are imposed, which is we're proposing a town-wide charge. So this would apply to any development occurring in the town that meets the qualification of 5 or more stories with 10 or more residential units. We have to estimate the increase in need for service arising from development. That's a fancy way of saying we have to establish capital costs. We also have to look at the various facilities, services, specific projects that are proposed to be funded through CBCs. And then we have to take into account any sort of excess capacity within the town's existing infrastructure, the benefit to existing residents, and other adjustments for things like funding from other revenue sources. Next slide. So just quickly on the development forecast, we are looking at a 10-year planning horizon of 2024 to 2033. And as I mentioned, the CBC eligible units have to meet that threshold of 5 or more stories, 10 or more residential units. So based on our discussions with staff and looking at the known development applications, there's quite a bit of activity in the town that would qualify to pay for CBCs. In fact, we're looking at about 2,500 units over the next 10 years could potentially pay a CBC rate. And that represents about 80% of all the units that are anticipated to be constructed in the town over that period. Next slide. With respect to the capital program itself, we have included in the strategy a list of services and projects. That includes a brief description of what the projects are. They're also spelled out in the report itself. We've included information on anticipated timing of when we think this infrastructure will be constructed, the cost, as well as the funding sources for the various projects. So as I mentioned, there certainly is the ability to have flexibility in terms of how you allocate the CBC funds once they're collected. So what we see a number of municipalities do is once the CBC bylaw is implemented as part of the annual capital budgeting process, there could be a standalone policy or recommendations from staff about how those funds should be utilized or prioritized, if you will, going forward. Next slide. So I appreciate there is a lot of numbers on this slide, but what it's doing is summarizing all the great work we did with staff in terms of developing the capital project list. And so you could see on the far left-hand side of the table, we've listed all the various services that we've identified as being potentially funded from CBCs. The net costs represent the costs to the town, less any sort of grants or contributions. The ineligible shares of projects are what we would refer to as the benefit to existing or shares of projects that cannot be funded through CBC's development charges or other. It would really be required to be funded from, say, property taxes. DC eligible shares of projects where we have identified DC funding, we certainly netted that off. Other funding can be re-examined as part of your next DC study. So just because it's not being funded right now through DCs, what we've done is because the development charge study was done in 2020, we're now doing the CBC strategy here in 2024. When your DC study gets reopened and done again, there's going to be opportunity to look at this list of projects and include a number of things that we've identified for the CBC strategy. We recommend that the municipality or the town certainly max out development charge funding because you are able to collect more through that revenue source and it is permitted under the legislation. So after we make all those adjustments, we arrive at our total CBC eligible share. And so going down the list here, you can see that we have identified about $93 million in infrastructure over the next 10 years, of which about 47 million or 50% we feel could be attributed to CBC eligible development and is growth related. So if we go to the next slide, just before I get into the anticipated revenue from CBCs, I just wanted to talk about the rate structures a little bit more. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, certainly the town could do things like establish a per unit rate for CBCs. We could look at $1 per hectare amount. You could even go as far as to say $1 per square foot. However, very, very few municipalities have implemented any of those rate structures because the legislation caps at 4% of the land value. And because the land value can change from site to site or development to development, it makes a lot of sense to just set it at the maximum cap that's permitted through the legislation. And so that certainly is what we're recommending the town to do, is to bring forward a CBC rate of 4% of the land value. So keeping that in mind, if we go to the next slide, based on land valuations from neighboring municipalities in Niagara region, we've come up with an estimate of how much revenue we think the town will actually collect over the next 10 years based on the development forecast and also this average land value. So looking at a low of about 25,000 per unit, a high of 50,000, that gives us an average of 37,500. That translates to about $1,500 a unit. When we multiply that by the growth, that amounts to 3.8 million. So if we go to the next slide, why that number is important is because, if you recall, we've identified about 47 million in CBC eligible projects, and we're forecasting just shy of 4. This is a very similar relationship to what we see in other municipalities. Unfortunately, because of the 4% of land value cap, it really is quite limited in terms of the amount of monies that municipalities can recover. Nonetheless, we do feel that it's an important revenue source in order for the town to have, as much revenue as possible to select from when funding capital infrastructure projects. And so essentially what this calculation demonstrates is that through the town's capital program that we've identified, we are not going to fund the 4% of land value. We're able to charge that on any development that comes forward because our capital program certainly surpasses that amount. Next slide. So I've chatted a bit throughout the presentation about what other places are doing, and what we've done, because many municipalities are setting it at 4% of the land value, is we've teased out an average value per unit. So certainly you would see swings within individual developments within the municipalities we're showing on the slide here, but nonetheless we thought it would be helpful to provide a bit of a comparison. So we're using $1,500 a unit for the town, looking at some other places very similar to the town of Fort Erie, at just shy of $1,500 as well. Niagara Falls, theirs range from about $1,600 to $2,000 a unit. And so municipalities like the town of Innisfil and Pickering, those are really the only ones that have gone down the path of calculating $1 per unit rate and setting it at that threshold. The town of Innisfil's CBC bylaw is under appeal in part because they went with a different rate structure. So certainly the overwhelming majority of municipalities that have brought forward CBCs are using 4% of the land value. Next slide. Great. And so really just to wrap things up before we get into questions is to talk a little bit about where we're heading over the next couple months. So we've done a lot of work in order to get us to where we are today. The strategy, the draft strategy is now formally available on the agenda, same with the draft bylaw. We will be meeting with the development industry. We're targeting June 7th, and then hosting a public meeting on June 17th in order to get feedback or gain feedback on what we're proposing. And the slide indicates that the bylaw would be passed on July 8th. We just updated that date earlier this afternoon to July 8th. And so that's when we would bring it forward for council's approval. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Jackie. Can I have a mover and seconder to get report FIN 2411 on the floor for discussion? Moved by Councillor Frank. Second by Councillor Howe. And just before I take questions, I guess you're the messenger, but I remember when growth was supposed to pay for growth. And unfortunately now, it's looking like our ratepayers are paying for growth, and I'll just leave it at, that's completely not right. And I have a big issue with that. And we definitely need developers to pay their fair share, and it should not go on the property tax base, and I have a big, big problem with that. Councillor DeFlavio?
Thank you, Worship, through you. So a few questions. So just to be clear, this is outside of development charges. So development charges are still there. We're still collecting those based on the things that you talked about. So hard costs like infrastructure and things like that, and as well as the other projects that we have updated our development charges based on. So if we think a park or a recreation center is something that should be subject to development charges, those are still there. This is to replace Section 37. So Section 37, for those who weren't familiar with it, was the bonusing section that if a building, if 12 stories were allowed and a developer came forward with a 20-story development, then we could charge them kind of a tax in lieu of that extra height. And I'm going to be honest, I was never comfortable with it because it seemed very subjective. I want to take as much money as possible, but I want to make sure that they're all paying their fair share. And the old system, the Section 37 system, seemed to be kind of a whimsical approach to it. So I'm glad that there is a system that we're putting in place. So the questions I have for you are related to the 4% charge. 4% set on the day, the 4% system, am I understanding it correctly? So it's before any construction occurs. How much is that land worth the day before building permits are, but that's after the application process has occurred. So a 22-story building has been approved for this site. What is the value of that land? So if it's $10 million, $400,000 is am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, through the mayor. Yes, you are. So essentially what the legislation requires is that we determine the land valuation the day before the first permit is issued. So you're absolutely right. All of the planning approvals would be in place by that point in time. And so it would reflect, the valuation of the land would reflect that you're allowed to build a 22-story building on that particular site, which would have an upward pressure on the land value if you were to only permit, say, 5 stories.
Through you, Mayor. So I think everybody's sharing a concern, and I share the mayor's concern about the development paying for development. This doesn't in any way make developers not have to pay for, if an increase in a sewage line is required in order for this new development to occur, if new sidewalks are required, those are the types of development charges we would take or would require the developer to pay for anyway. This doesn't replace that, right? Like this, it doesn't change that. They would still be responsible for those things?
Yes, through the mayor. You're absolutely correct. So certainly any sort of local service that a developer is required to build, whether it's a pipe or a road, a local road, that is still their responsibility. We're not taking anything out of the town's development charges background study and saying it should be funded through CBCs. In fact, we're strongly recommending that when the DC study gets reopened in, say, the next year or two, the list of capital projects gets re-examined and updated to maximize the DC funding, because that is where you're able to collect more of those for those types of infrastructure like water, wastewater, roads, parks and recreation. So once you maximize that funding mechanism, then that's where the CBCs come into play. But the CBCs can only fund infrastructure for higher density development.
Through you, Mayor. So this would apply to all higher density. If we were to implement this, the old 37 rule, the Section 37 rule was just those that are above what's allowed in. So if it's zoned for 6 stories and they wanted 12 stories, then we could use that bonusing. Would this apply to all new construction now? So it would be blanketed across the municipality. We wouldn't have to worry about having that debate. Everybody would know that this is something that we're collecting no matter what you're building? Or is it just on those ones, again, that are above, I know it's above 5 stories and above 10 units, but is it above what's allowed on the land, or is it all development?
Through the mayor, that's a really great question. It applies to all development that is 5 or more stories with 10 or more residential units. It doesn't take into account what's been permitted and what's being allowed now, which is, as you made a correct comment about, it's trying to make the process more transparent.
And the last thing, Mayor, through you, so as far as appeals are concerned, you mentioned that one of the other municipalities didn't use the 4% system. In your opinion, do you think the 4% approach would limit developers' ability to appeal? Because if it's what's being used across the province, it's kind of a standard, and we don't have to get into that debate, because we have a lot of things that we get appealed on without having an additional one. So I'd like to take the path of least resistance and most money. So if that's what this is, then yes, let's do it. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, through the mayor. So we have not yet met with the development industry, so we're not quite clear if they will have any concerns with the rate structure that we're proposing. However, I can say that the City of Mississauga and Toronto were both successful in defending appeals of their CBC bylaws using 4% as the rate structure. So certainly, as part of recent OLT decisions, that further strengthens our recommendation that the town take this approach, because to your point, Councillor, it will, one, maximize the amount of revenues you can collect, and two, it's now been adjudicated and defended successfully at the tribunal.
Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I just kind of noticed that most of the municipality comparables listed are all pretty large cities. Do you have any examples of smaller towns more closely related to our size implementing something like this? Because I'd probably say that Niagara Falls would probably be our closest comparable here.
Yes, through the mayor. It's an excellent question. And so CBCs are still a relatively new revenue tool. So we are just seeing a lot of municipalities, especially the small to medium-sized ones, bring forward CBC bylaws. A lot of municipalities decided to let the Torontos and Mississaugas kind of duke it out at the beginning and get things settled in terms of how it should be dealt with. So unfortunately, we don't have many other municipalities to add to this list. We certainly can take it back and flesh it out a bit more, and it's a really great comment. But I think there might only be maybe 3 or 4 more we could add to the list. But yeah, certainly if there's any more that are available, we'll add it to the comparison.
And just to follow up, my only kind of concerns off the top would be with the appraisal process. So you said with the town having to have 3 appraisers at phone calls ready. To me, just establishing a per unit, because it's only applying to high-rise development, right? So I think a per unit structure just makes more sense and would limit the potential for pushback or disagreement, say, between appraisers.
Yes, through the mayor. So that's an excellent comment and something we have discussed with staff in terms of how are we going to bring forward the appraisals. There's a few different approaches that have been used by municipalities. So the neighbors in Niagara region, Fort Erie and Niagara Falls, what they both require is that the developer bring forward an appraisal based on the value of the land the day before the first permit, but it has to be done through an accredited appraiser. And so that approach has worked quite well. The City of Mississauga, recognizing that, with the amount of higher density development they're getting and the magnitude of it, they've decided to, for each application they get, they're actually going out and tendering an appraisal, and then saying to the developer, this is how much you owe. And the developer can dispute that if they don't agree with what the municipality or what the city has brought forward. We're not recommending that approach for the town, at least at this point in time. It seems to be working okay in other places where the developer brings forward an appraisal, but certainly the town can reserve the right to say, we feel that this isn't an appropriate number. You can go out and get your own appraisal done. And then there's very specific rules in the Planning Act about how you deal with the appraisals if they're within 5% of each other, the number of days that you have in order to do it, and that's all spelled out in the strategy as well. So I'm not sure if that totally answered your question, but it's a good comment.
Councillor Shaw.
Through Mayor Jordan, thank you. When you had brought up the slide, I don't know if it's different than the presentation that we have through eScribe, but I thought it was on page 13 where you had used Fort Erie and Niagara Falls as comparators. And I think it's safe to say that our land value is quite a bit higher than Fort Erie. So I'm just not sure how that plays into our equation and whether we're going to get shortchanged in that. If you can just explain that and how you came up with that.
Yes, through the mayor. Excellent question, and I probably could have explained it a little bit better. So we unfortunately didn't have any appraisals we could use specific to the town based on CBC qualifying developments at this time. So what we did was we looked at appraisals we were able to draw upon from our work in Fort Erie and Niagara Falls as an approximation. And so that's why we showed it as a low and high and then an average, because you're absolutely correct. It's probably a very different story here in the town of Grimsby. And so we're not shortchanging ourselves in any way because the appraisal is based on each individual application. This is simply a way to demonstrate that we are not going to offend the legislative requirement of 4% of the land value. Essentially what we're saying is that we have almost 50 million in CBC eligible infrastructure over the next 10 years. We're only going to fund about 4 million of it. Even if the town's land appraisals are 25% higher, we're not going to offend that $50 million or the 4% cap.
Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. So I just kind of wanted to also ask, like, with the process of getting these appraisals, so would a planning application be deemed complete once there's an agreement upon the appraisal, or is it going to affect in our timelines that way?
Through the mayor. So the CBCs are payable at building permit issuance. So certainly from the time that they have their planning approvals done, then they can go ahead and get the appraisal. So I don't expect that it would cause any sort of concerns with the planning approval process. I also haven't heard from any of our clients that have implemented the CBCs that it caused any sort of issues there. It obviously does require more administration from staff. So that's something to certainly consider when we're setting up the program. But in terms of causing any sort of delays with applications, I haven't heard any of that.
That's just my concern is the added work for staff. So I just, offhead, I feel like a per unit structure, whether that's 1,500 or what that price is, just in terms of a workflow perspective, just seems to be a smoother process in my mind, but I'm still refreshing to this thing.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you very much again for your presentation, Jackie. And we have mover and seconder, moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Howe. Resolved that the presentation from Hempson Consulting be received and the report FIN 24-11 Community Benefit Charge Strategy dated May 21st, 2024 be received. All in favor? That's carried. Up next, we have a delegation from John Dunstall on the BIA financial transition. John, please come to the podium.
I think he's...
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I asked your deputy clerk, since your meeting is going on as long as it is, what I have to say is not time sensitive. And if I could reschedule for the next council meeting when we're all fresher, because you've already had almost 2 hours, would that be all right?
Yeah, if council will put a motion on to defer, I'm quite happy to hear you. Councillor Vardy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. When is the AGM?
The 29th.
The 29th. So
Yeah.
when's our next, if just a moment, please?
It's June, so.
It's June. So then I don't think we really can defer this because we're going into the AGM, and I think it would be better if it were somewhat informed by our comments.
I'm only here on my own. I'm just here, I'm not representing the DIA. I'm just sharing my experiences being on the board before. So I don't want to, so is that all right? I don't.
Leave it to council, thanks.
Councillor Sharwal.
I'd be fine putting forward something to defer.
All right, do you have a seconder? All right, moved by Councillor Sharwal, second by Councillor Korsanji. Resolved that the delegation from John Dunstall be deferred to the next council meeting, June 2nd or 3rd. All in favor? Looks like that's carried.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we have Councillor Frake. You can give your chair's report for corporate services from May 6th.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Okay. The Corporate Services meeting was held on May the 6th. There were no disclosures of interest. We received previous minutes from the Joint Accessibility Advisory Committee from March 14th. Previous minutes from Corporate Services of April 2nd and the Grimsby Town BIA of April the 10th. And I'll stop there for a second because we extracted 3 of the motions out of those minutes from the BIA, which is on our agenda to be discussed tonight. So I'll just pass through that one. So that was passed. There was 3 motions, BIA 24028, 24029, and 24033. So that's coming up on the agenda later. We had 7 delegations that dealt with the keeping of domestic farm animals. A very passionate group, I might add. So there was 7 delegations. And we received a consent report to deal with high school bursaries. We suggested or endorsed 2 $500 bursaries, one for a student of Blessed Trinity Catholic Secondary School and one for West Niagara Secondary School. We had a discussion report on the keeping of domestic animals as a follow-on from the delegation. And we received a piece of correspondence from the region related to diversity, equity, and inclusion and their action plan. And that was pretty much it. There was no other business, and our next meeting was to be held on June the 3rd.
Thank you, Councillor Frake. Before we approve the previous minutes, there is a staff memorandum on the agenda outlining resolutions that were deferred for council approval. Can I have a mover and seconder to get the memo on the floor for discussion? Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Vardy. Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Vardy. I'll read the resolution and then I'll open it up for discussion. Resolved that the staff memorandum be received and that 1, Resolution BIA 24-028 be approved, and 2, that Resolution BIA 24-029 be received and that Resolution BIA 24-033 be deferred as part of the BIA's financial transition. Councillor Davoli?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. I would just like to talk about those 3 resolutions. The purpose of the resolutions was obviously to make sure that the local board understands and has clear policies on these 3 matters. And yet I still have some concerns. I don't believe our finance department has had an opportunity to review them and add any of their comments or amendments to those policies. Those policies were drafted by the board members of the DIA. And I would just like to point out a few, what I will say, inaccuracies or anomalies within them. In the first one, for example, they talk about investments, they talk about reserves, and then they talk about reserve funds. There is a difference between reserves and reserve funds, and a very clear difference under the Municipal Act. They use the terms interchangeably. I think it's important that, you know, the terms be used correctly, and so I just offer that as one small example. The third policy deals with the maintenance and the need for petty cash. And I will share with my fellow councillors that in this day and age, most of the businesses that I worked with in the past have long given up the maintenance of a petty cash fund. It's just not necessary in this day and age. Traditionally, credit cards will cover much of that off, and it is difficult to maintain, watch, and keep track of a petty cash fund, especially in this case where the BIA does not have an office. So then the question is, where is this cash even being kept? They have an executive director. Does that mean it's kept at their home? Is it kept at the chair's place of business, and so on, right? And so I really think it would be worth the effort to ask our finance staff to review these three policies and come back with any adjustments or recommendations that could improve them. And so I would like to see and put forth that this matter be referred back to our finance staff for comment.
Yeah, I think it's written that way. So is it? All right, so, Councillor, you agree that this is kind of the same resolution we have here?
Yes, Mayor. I think, just to reiterate, to make sure I do understand, is that what we are envisioning is that once the AGM is held, and if the process is approved for them to move forward on financial autonomy, then these policies would be reviewed by various staff, whether it be the clerk's department, the finance department, whoever is appropriate in that manner, and then would come back to us at each stage to make sure it meets the criteria.
Great. Seeing no, we have a mover and seconder, so seeing no further questions, moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Vardy, resolved that the staff memorandum be received and that resolution BIA 24-028 be approved, and that resolution BIA-24-029 be received, and that resolution BIA 24-033 be deferred as part of the BIA's financial transition. All in favor? That's carried. All right, can I have a mover and seconder to approve the previous minutes? Corporate Services, May 6th, Council, May 6th, and Special Council, May 9th. Moved by Councillor DeFlavio, seconded by Councillor Howe. Moved by Councillor DeFlavio, seconded by Councillor Howe. Resolved that the following minutes be approved. Corporate Services Committee, May 6, 2024, Council, May 6, 2024, and Special Council, May 9th, 2024. All in favor? That's carried. Up next, I have receipt of board minutes. Can I have a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Korstanji, second by Councillor Bradzi. Moved by Councillor Korstanji, second by Councillor Bradzi. Resolved that the Grimsby Public Library Board minutes of April 10th, 2024 be received. All in favor? That's carried. Now we move to announcements, and I'll lead off the announcements. I'm delighted to announce that I will be hosting the 2024 Mayor's Masters Golf Tournament, which is a charity golf tournament in support of the Community Services Department and United Way Niagara. The 2024 Mayor's Master Tournament is scheduled for Wednesday, August 28th, 2024 at the renowned 20 Valley Golf and Country Club. Registration for the tournament is now open. Golfers are encouraged to assemble their friends, colleagues, or business associates to form teams. The tournament will follow a scramble format, ensuring an exciting and fair competition for all participants. For more information about the 2024 Mayor's Master Tournament, including registration details and sponsorship opportunities, please visit the Town of Grimsby's website or email golf@grimsby.ca. I hope that you will join us for a day of friendly competition, networking, and philanthropy at the 2024 Mayor's Masters Tournament. Any other announcements? Councillor Korstanji.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just want to send well wishes, good luck. I don't want to say good luck because it's skill, but our West Niagara Special Olympics basketball team is competing at the Special Olympic Provincial Spring Games this weekend, along with 2 of our bowlers. So I wish them well and have a great time, and I'll keep everybody updated.
Thank you, Councillor Cristanchi. Any other announcements? Seeing none, it's time for our regional councillor update. Councillor Seaborn, welcome to the podium. We're getting you on right around 8 o'clock, so it's nice and early.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Well, we've heard a lot about construction in Grimsby, and I'm going to bring you a bit more. So mine's not going to cost as much, and it's not going to last as long. How's that? So recently, aside from the conversation that we had earlier, transportation staff provided councillors with an update of capital projects identified for every municipality in the region, and several of them, of course, are for Grimsby. We're all eager to hear about the GO station, and I don't know anything more than you do, so we're still waiting to find out. But linked to the GO station is the capacity improvement of Regional Road 10. That's the Casablanca from Main Street to the North Service Road. The road construction project will include road widening, intersection improvements, active transportation, and the detailed design is already done. So it goes out to tender, and that's where we are right now. Hopefully we've got some GO news real soon, and that will just push this along. Regional Road 81 is up for lots of reconstruction. And this year, we had so many concerns from residents about the section between Casablanca and Oaks Road that myself and the gentleman you met today sat down and talked about trying to push it through a little bit faster. So it has gone on this year's books. It means that in the next couple of weeks, the residents in that area will start seeing regional workers patching the road and trying to get rid of the worst parts of it, mitigating it just to make it passable. In 2025, they'll be in there putting in the utilities for the road improvement, and by 2026, they'll be doing the full reconstruction of that road. So that portion of the road is still very urban, and for that section of Regional Road 81, you're going to find curbs and sidewalks on the north side of the road. The south side, for those that are familiar with that road, you'll notice that a lot of swales are still there for runoff and getting rid of the water. Those swales will remain in place, and that section only will still have a granular shoulder. The rest of the road will be completely paved, so from one end to the other. They'll be putting in proper sewers and drains, and it'll look like a well-done road. And I think everybody in that area will be happy to hear that, yes, it's been moved up and it will get done. So it will become phase 1 of the updates for Regional Road 81. There are 4 phases to this problem, or this road work rather, and all of these will see reconstruction of the roads where there are curbs, there are sidewalks, and bike lanes. So remember the kids I talked about last week? They're going to be thrilled. The first part will start at the high school, and it'll go to Park Road. That is scheduled for approximately 2026. Phase 2 will capture the road between Park and Baker. Now that one's probably going to be 2029. Phase 3 will continue on from Baker to Nels. And the construction phase will be around 2030. So work will be being done before that. The actual construction phase, best guess right now is 2030. And the final phase of this project will be from Nels to Orchard. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of other work being done in the town. The Grimsby will be busy this year with the start of construction of Century condos. In 2025, the regional water main will be replaced. Now there's 2 sections of the road, of course, being done. One is the downtown core, the other one is Elm Street, and they'll meet together roughly around Robinson. The downtown core will be open for business, but there will be some traffic disruptions, and the town of Grimsby, the region of Niagara, and certainly the Grimsby Downtown Business Improvement Area are working really hard to minimize the disruptions. So we want to make sure everybody will
be shopping downtown because it'll still be open for business. So lots of work being done in Grimsby. I'm just touching on road work right now that has hit the books and been scheduled. And if you've got any other questions or other than that, I'd be happy to help.
Thank you for your presentation, Michelle. Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Thank you very much, Councillor, for your report. And the residents of Ward 4, thank you very much for Casablanca and Regional Road 81. But with the other, so Regional 81 by the high school, are they twinning the lanes there through the school?
There's a lot of work being done in that particular area. The road in that area is all confusing to everybody with the different lines and what have you. There'll be bike lanes, there'll be sidewalks, there'll be turning lanes and curbs and the whole thing. It'll be completely urbanized.
Councillor Vardy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned that they'd be working on the road from Baker to Nels at some point. Was it 2026?
No, I'm sorry. The part from Baker to Nels is going to be 2030. It's the work from the high school to Park is 2026. So it'll be working its way westward.
Okay. I just want to remind them that we've got two major construction right at the corner of basically Main and Nels, right? We've got one on, we've got the Losani and the DeSantis property. And I'm not quite sure what their timing is, but just wanted to flag that to you. There'll be a lot of construction, so I don't know if it's better to do it before, after, during, how it goes, but I just thought I'd highlight it to you.
I don't know if we actually have start dates for the DeSantis and the Losani building yet either. So I'm sure they'll work it all together. They don't want to tear up something they've just put in. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Councillor Seaborn. How are the decisions being made regarding what the infrastructure improvements are going to look like on Casablanca? Because there were lots of different design ideas that we saw over the years. So the reason why I'm asking, Roberts Road in Livingston has intersection, has lights. Casablanca in Livingston, which is significantly higher traffic, and Casablanca and Main Street, neither one of those intersections have lights. And I can tell you from the perspective of somebody that uses that road multiple times a day, that the Casablanca and people feel like there should be a three-way stop at Casablanca and Main Street. So the people coming up Casablanca, because they come off the highway, they think that cars coming through will be stopping, and they're not. And and then I don't know. You're very familiar with it. There's also a fruit stand that goes in on that corner every spring and summer, where there are people who make fake right turns because they start signaling right as if they're going to turn down Casablanca, but continue through the intersection to pull over at the fruit stand. So it's like a driving video. Like you need to really be aware of all the things that are going on. The reason why I'm asking is regional staff looking at the potential of lights at those intersections, turning lanes at Livingston. These are all things that I've been asking for 20 years, and I still haven't seen happen. So I'm going to continue to pester you, through you, Mayor, and you, Mayor, because you're there too, for improvements to that road, because they haven't. The population of Grimsby's West End has increased exponentially over the last 40 or 50 years, and there have been no improvements to Casablanca in my lifetime. None. Other than the flowers that Jordan's used to donate back in the day to that intersection, there have been no actual road improvements. So how can we provide that feedback to regional staff so we can see those kinds of improvements and make sure that they're happening?
Well, thank you for that question, Councillor DeFlavio. I see that we have Brandon on the line. I wonder if Brandon actually wants to answer that question for you, since it's a joint project with the town and the region.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So just to confirm, Councillor DeFlavio, the region, they are in the process of designing the various phases of the Casablanca reconstruction. The portion south of the CN tracks is phase 2-3 that we're calling it. That will include widening their urbanization and signalized intersection at both the Livingston Casablanca intersection and the Main Street Casablanca intersection as well. So as you know, or maybe I've communicated previously, we're currently working with the region, sorting out some stormwater design. And once that's complete, the future phases of the construction work will be on the books, I guess, is the best way to say it. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Thank you, Brandon. Councillor Howe?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Michelle, somebody was whispered in my ear or talked to me, is at the Park School site, let's say, understand that a flashing light is going to be okay? And that would be also BT, and they can be used. Is that right?
No, that's not correct.
Okay.
So I know that information was recently passed on that the MTO has said that in their estimation, there's no reason why they can't be used. And for any roads that the MTO might have full jurisdiction with, that's perfectly fine. But the MTO has also said that the upper tier and the lower tier get to make the distinction themselves. They have decided that they're not going to use the flashing lights because the flashing lights are a trigger for people, rightfully so, that there is a slowdown in the traffic coming up. The thing is, the traffic slowdown, the area that is at 40 kilometers an hour right now is from 7 in the morning till 5. The flashing lights don't always run during that long period of time. And the problem is that if you declare that I went through at a certain time and the flashing lights there weren't flashing, I shouldn't get the fine, when in effect, you're still running during that time. It has been one of the biggest and hardest things that we've had to deal with, the flashing lights. The other thing that we've dealt with is the size of the sign that indicates that you're coming into a 40 zone. Again, in conversations with that department, they're going to do everything they can to make sure it's a little bit more clear, because in all honesty, I think they're a little bit on the small side. But there will not be flashing lights coming in any of the school zones that are going to have cameras. So you know that the next one coming is Blessed Trinity. The next one, but they will rotate. So it's coming back to Park, as you were wishing at one point. It will be back to Park School, but it'll continue on the rotation. So it'll be another year and a half probably before it gets back. So both Mr. Tassoni, who you met today, and the Commissioner Rickers has had the opportunity to try and get the message clear that the flashing lights will not work in the Niagara situation when it comes to the cameras.
Councillor Sharwell.
Through Mayor Jordan, thank you. So I love the upgrades. I think anytime we have a push for active transportation, I like that. I like the fact that if we're trying to move towards biking, that's great. And I understand, I think a lot of these places are needed, especially with the GO train. Nobody wants the GO train probably more than I do, or most of us do, or I think all of us do. So that makes sense. The one that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, though, is the upgrade that seems to have been pushed forward from Main Street West, Oaks to Casablanca. So we currently don't have much density in that area. And yet we're going to be, this is getting fast-tracked, we're getting curbs, we're getting bike lanes, even though there are no houses currently there. So I'm just wondering if there are plans that possibly we don't know about yet, or if you have any feedback or something, some information that I do not yet quite have.
There is no secrets behind that one. Councillor Charrois, there was a lot of concerns about that road, to the point where I actually drove it myself this year during the winter and was very critical about it. I invited staff from the region to come and drive it as well. And they concurred that that stretch between Casablanca and Oaks was probably the worst stretch of road work in Grimsby right now. And that's why it was updated. So it's not like we lost anything, nothing got pushed behind. It was updated, it was always on the books to be done, but it will now happen a little bit sooner with early remediation of the worst parts of it to happen starting, they said, probably by the end of May, if not by the end of June. So you're going to see some road work there very soon to try and clean that up a little bit.
Thank you.
Councillor Vardy.
Thank you. Just two more things. One, if we can't get a flashing light, can we get at least a sign that says your speed, and you can see what it is as a trigger to, speed limit 40, your speed 45, so that, immediately you get the notion that, whoa, hit the brakes before you get the ticket. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and I've been asking for this for quite a while, can we get an advanced green at Main and Nellis? We have a turning lane on both sides, but when it's busy, if it's during the sort of peak hours, I live around there, so I know, but I might have to wait for 30 cars to go by before I can turn, and then the only chance I'll get to turn is if I make it into the intersection, I go on the yellow. So, and hopefully that there's nobody coming who's going to try and get through the yellow. So I think, and because we have a lot of foot traffic there, and we've got the school there, whatever, I think it would just make the intersection that much safer.
It's certainly something I can bring up again. I will let you know that I have broached that subject on your behalf in the past, and they did have somebody come out and do a traffic count, and their findings was that it was not called for at that time, which is not saying it won't always be that way, but at the time that they did it, they felt that there wasn't enough. With regards to the school issue,
There's a school right there.
Yeah.
There's a school right there, so
I realize that,
should
yeah.
be like an added level of consideration.
But you had also asked about having a flashing light telling you of the speed you're traveling, similar to the one when you're coming down the escarpment. I think, now I may be wrong, and if Brandon's still listening, I think the town actually has one of those that they can put in various places, and it probably wouldn't be a bad idea. But based on what we heard, Grimsby did really well for that section because the average speed during the 40 to 50 or 40 kilometer period was 42 kilometers an hour. So Grimsby did really well.
Edge got 2 tickets.
Councillor Charrois.
Through you, Mayor Jordan, thank you. That just reminded me, on my way here, similar to Councillor Vardy, on South Service Road at Christie, where there's also light there. When you are proceeding towards Lincoln on South Service Road, and there's that light there, it gets really far back. Like driving here, I noticed that and there wasn't, like, usually that's a route that people detour when there's an accident on the highway. There wasn't anything there, and the cars were almost at NRB trying to turn. So I don't know if there's anything that the region can do there as far as like keeping the light longer just to let that traffic through, or if there's something that can be looked at to alleviate some of that traffic, because people sit at that light for quite a while, and I was surprised that it was that far back and there was no traffic issues.
I've been in the same situation more than once, and I can bring it up and let them check it. They do come through and they check the lighting from time to time and the timing. I should mention at this point that there will be a slight change in timing for anybody traveling how will it go, north and south on Christie/Mountain during the time that the market is on, which, by the way, starts on May 30th. So yes, there's another road closure you're going to see every Thursday. Sorry. But anyways, they turn the light, they make make that light longer for people that now are forced to make a left-hand turn onto Elm Street. So the region automatically does that. I'll have them walk down the street and see what the other one looks like. Again, it's time of day. It's kind of hit and miss too with that one. Sometimes it's a long wait and sometimes not so much.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. So, Councillor Seaborn, what I'd love to see, and I think the rest of the town would like to see a year from now or 6 months from now, after the cameras have been moved, is the data, the pre-camera data for Main Street at near Park School, the during camera data and the post data camera data that tells us how effective that camera was. We know, you talked about it being a 42 average, which is great. Now that the camera's been removed, are people still obeying the speed limit? I'm gonna wager a guess that not so much as they were before. Just to tell us the effectiveness of the camera, right? Because I was strongly opposed to cameras. I still kind of am, but if they work, which what you're telling us is they seem to be working, and perhaps the data about how much money was collected once we have that data. So, and the same for the Blessed Trinity one. Although the Blessed Trinity one going there in the summer makes absolutely no sense to me, and I don't want to get into a big debate about that. Put it in there in September or whatever. Will it still be there in September when school starts? And if it is, then that's fine, because it'll have some effect on slowing down traffic. But anyway, the data, if you could, even if it's one of your reports without you having to speak it to us, but if we can get it back, because our Public Works Department does a really good job when we do our pilot projects of telling us the before, during, and after those pilot projects. And I think that would be great data to have from the region as well. So if you could provide that for us when it comes through, that would be great. Thank you.
I could probably only provide you the data that the camera is collecting. So before that, there's no method of counting how fast people are going unless we put a police officer there. But after the camera is the same thing. Although I would caution you that I think they're going slower than you think, especially around Park School. They may still believe that empty box has got a camera in it. So. Yeah, okay. We'll just leave that, but I think they're doing pretty good. I think Grimsby's doing all right with their cameras.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your update, Councillor Seaborn. Look forward to seeing you at the market on May 30th. Next, we have the one-year review of the Standing Committee Governance Structure Report that was deferred from the previous meeting. Can I have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor for discussion? Moved by Councillor Bradsey, second by Councillor Charwa. Questions, comments? Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just going to reiterate what I said the last time. I think that we haven't really given the existing program a full chance yet. We haven't even had a year where budgets go through the standing committees. So I would encourage council to at least give it another year. Let's see how it works through the budget process and the effectiveness of the standing committees during the budget process. I don't want to go over all the reasons why, again, as far as public input and participation are concerned, but I hope council will make the decision based on what we promised during the election, and that is the the process that we have in place right now.
Councillor Charwa.
Through Mayor Jordan, I'm still very much supporting council only. We've tried it, and I'm not going to go over all of my points that I made before, but I can say that I do normally tend to get feedback from residents if they disagree with something or they have a very strong opinion. I only received one email from a resident who was on an advisory committee that didn't like the change, but that was it. So.
Councillor Vardy.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. Well, first of all, I'll just have to address something that Councillor DeFlavio brought up. I like the way we did the budgets this year. I don't believe the budgets should go through, should be vetted through standing committees first. I think they should be committee of the whole, because I know I want to see everything and not have someone else, when it comes to budgeting, say, well, that's in, that's out. So I want to see the whole landscape. So I have to say I disagree with Councillor DeFlavio on the issue of budgets. I guess I disagree with his comments that, we've only given this a year. Well, I think in the year, I know from my perspective, I think we need to flatten the organization, because if you have an advisory committee reporting up to a standing committee, it just takes that much longer for any of those issues to come to council, and they rarely actually get council attention. So I really believe that we need to flatten this out, not have advisory committees reporting to standing committees. I would like to see the advisory committees reporting up on their own, however, with advisory committees being chaired by a councillor. Now, I understand in some cases that's not appropriate. For instance, the library board or the committee of adjustment. Those are not ones that should be chaired by councillors, but I think we need to eliminate this, and I'll call it a layer of bureaucracy, so that where we do have advisory committees, their impact can be felt more directly. And so, I know we sort of have lots of them on the screen. They don't meet every month. Not all of them meet every month. So, it doesn't mean that because we have this long line that that there's going to be that much more. But I think it lessens the bureaucracy that we have and allows standing committees the opportunity for their comments and advice to be heard more directly. Because right now, and I'm thinking more specifically with Green Committee, it's got to go up to community services. Rarely do things get picked up. Usually the minutes are approved, and then when it comes around to coming to council, the community services minutes along with the Green Advisory minutes, for the most part, they get approved. So, and it's a voice that's not being heard. So I would like to see just one flat line, standing committees and advisory committees reporting directly up, with advisory committees, where appropriate, being chaired by a councillor. And I would like to put forth an amendment to, I believe, option 1 to reflect that.
Yeah, Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Just to quickly regurgitate some of my comments from last week. I do think that option 1 in council only is the most efficient form. All these 2 other options, I'll have 3 levels, whether it's advisory, committee of the whole, and up to council. I think this is an option where, like Councillor Vardy said, there's removal of that the middle sandwiched layer, where I find a lot of the advisory committees are feeling that things are going to kind of get lost. And from the conversations I've had, majority of them like the prospect and the idea of reporting directly to council. The one thing that I would want to amend from option one would be to, just right now, there's no inclusion of a finance committee. And I do believe in the strength of the members that have been selected to that committee, and I still think that a finance advisory committee could still take place under the current structure. And I just wanted to reiterate for anyone who's kind of concerned, it's not like we're not packing up shop on committees as a whole. There's still committees, or no pun intended with committees as a whole. I mean, with residents on committees, we're still keeping the residents, we're still listening to the residents. We're just trying to improve our workflows and our process, and I think we should focus on it from a workflow perspective tonight, because that's, at the end of the day, that's all that's changing.
Councillor DeVoley.
Thank you. Wasn't sure which order this was going in here. I thought a number of us had our hands up. I would like to say, and probably repeat something I said last time, that I do believe our standing committees have a very big role to play in the work of council. When many of us ran, we were asked as to, what we thought of the governance structure, committee of the whole versus standing committees, and I supported it then, and I still do. I believe rather than throwing it out, we should work to improve what we have. I believe that if we go to any other structure, it's going to involve more meetings, more time by everyone, because now if you don't sit on community services, if you don't sit on planning, well, now you're expected to be up to date, to be, to research and to be current with issues that you currently would not need to be so concerned about. That's not to say that I don't read those minutes, that I don't read those reports on occasion when there's something there that I need to know, but I don't need to physically attend those meetings and be prepared for them. So I believe that it's not just the colors on the calendar, but it's the actual time that it takes to go to these meetings that we should also be thinking about. I know when we talk about losing our lay members, I think we are going to lose our lay members. Comments by a few of them to some of us have been that, if they wish there was more they could do on the standing committee. If we move them down to an advisory committee, there is even less responsibility and less input, and they will probably leave us. And I would really, really hate to see that happen. We have I sit on Public Works and Finance, and so I can only comment on those two, but we have some really, really talented people on those committees, and I would love to have their input going forward, and I'm not so sure that lessening their responsibilities will keep them with us. So, there is already, as I said, a lot of time that we take to prepare for meetings, and I think that's going to involve even more. What do I think we should do to improve all of this? Definitely when we have lay members, I think even going forward with our committees, if we have 3 great lay members, great. If we have people applying and we only get 2 great lay members, then I think we should make sure that the wording of our rules on all of that is to take less than 3, if that is the case. I think that the function of some of our committees the meeting time has been so short. Sometimes some committees meet for only 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And so it does make you wonder why they are meeting and whether some of the standing committees could be combined. And so I think there's room to improve it that way by combining some of our standing committees. I realize many of our advisory committees need to be there. And I would just note for Council's benefit, we listed both Grimsby Power and Niagara Power, and Niagara Power owns Grimsby Power, so realistically they are not separate. There are some that fill a legal responsibility, but there are some that are there simply to get public input and assistance on matters. I think we need to tighten those up as to exactly what we're looking for from them. They have involved a significant amount of staff time, and perhaps that's part of why our staff are concerned. I understand there have been some meetings where we've had various and almost all of our senior directors at those advisory committees, and I do think that that is not necessary, and we should try and cut back on that. So I guess what I'd like to say in closing, that I believe our standing committees have a very real role, that even at the ones I sit on, we've had much more time to get into the weeds, to have some various serious discussions that we will not be able to nor want to have when we meet, as a committee of the whole or council. That will involve very long meetings. We've been able to work on some things, work on schedules, work on some deeper issues, and yet we've only scratched the surface. And so I would like to see us continue to have standing committees and to continue to be able to get into some of these deeper issues.
Point of clarification, Councillor Vardy.
If I could just clarify for Councillor DeVoley, I was not suggesting that we get rid of standing committees at all, just to change the reporting structure of the advisory committees. That's all. I sit on finance. I believe we should keep finance as a standing committee. I know it wasn't there on one of the charts, but I believe in keeping all the standing committees, however, having the advisory committees, having a direct reporting relationship, because they're getting buried under, and it's not from having sat on standing committee and advisory committee, it's very different. And there is a lot of frustration on advisory committees from that perspective. But I just wanted you to understand that I'm not suggesting we get rid of standing committees, but just that we have a flat line across.
Go ahead.
Yes, through the mayor, if I may clarify, I think there's a couple things to clarify. So the intention with option 1 as it's written is that any budget items would go to committee of the whole budget, like the budget committee of the whole. If you wanted to add a finance advisory committee, that would need to be an amendment. It is not currently written like that. In addition, option 1, the standing committees are not being transitioned into advisory committees. We would be eliminating the public works, finance, planning, and corporate services, and community services standing committees completely. And any items that would typically go to those standing committees would go directly to council. The purpose of that is, 1, to flatten the structure. 2, a standing committee and advisory committee are different, and we were not looking, if we are looking to just keep all the same committees but flatten the structure, that wasn't the intention of how it was written. So we could add an amendment for finance, but if we're just going to change all of them to advisory committees, that is not what we would staff would recommend.
I wasn't suggesting that.
Okay.
I was suggesting that we keep our standing committees, including finance. We keep our standing committees. However, the advisory committees, which are subsumed under the standing committees now, would have a direct reporting relationship to council and be chaired by a member of council. So we're not getting rid of standing committees. We're not getting rid of any of the lay members on those committees. They do important work. They bring expertise. It's just the advisory committees are buried and their voices aren't being heard. So that's the only change I'm suggesting, is just bringing those 6 advisory committees to report directly to council and be chaired by a council member. That was my amendment that I was suggesting.
Logistically, I think what you're saying is that the minutes of advisory committees would no longer go to standing committees, they would go direct to council.
Yes.
So through you, can I ask for clarification on that? So that's not option 1. That would be maintaining the current structure, but changing the reporting structure for the advisory committees. So what option would that be, and what?
Through the chair, I would suggest it is option 2, but would require some amendment. So we're just working those out here. So we
All right, do you want the floor now, Councillor Frank? Because you haven't spoken yet. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jordan. I'm a strong believer that, we could make more decisions faster, and I think we could cut a lot of cost and time out of the decision-making process if we have a flatter organization. I mean, certainly we all have to agree to that. Right now, we try to make decisions or advice at the advisory committee. It goes through a standing committee, gets discussed or not discussed, whatever, and eventually it ends up to council. It may get missed or maybe not. Maybe not discussed or maybe not. Maybe decisions aren't made properly or not, but it takes probably 2 to 3 months to get a decision that may emanate from an advisory committee. So it takes much too long. It takes a lot of support from staff at each level. And if we can cut out a level of the organization in the governance structure, I think we'd only be further ahead, because I think we make decisions faster and we'd cut some costs as well. And so I just feel that we're spinning our wheels because we go through, every committee kind of regurgitates at every level. And then eventually it gets to staff and maybe they have to do a report. Then we have to wait another month or 2 or 3 for that to come back. So it just seems like we're spinning our wheels all the time and taking so much time to make a decision when we could probably make a decision based on just a flat organization, one level reporting directly into council. I find that debating things over and over and over is just such a waste of time. So I think the flat organization, and I think that's, I call it Appendix E here, but you're calling it Option 1. But then looking at, and I don't think we should eliminate any lay members. I think lay members play a huge important role in all of those committees, except of course corporate services, which is a little bit different, but we can deal with that separately too. But the thing is, we need to rejig this. I mean, it just makes more sense for us to have this direct line through council so we can get to the crux of the issues and the problems and debates right away. The standing committees are not included in Appendix E, and I think what Councillor Vardy is suggesting that we make that another line along the same line as the advisory committee. So standing committees and advisory committees reporting directly into council. That's an option that is not in here. Right? Victoria, that's
Through the mayor,
that's another option.
It's not in there because we would not recommend it. From a structural point, all of those advisories and standing committees going to council logistically would complicate things. It's not eliminating any meetings. It's not speeding up the process. So it was purposely not an option. I think there's some there's some room if you wanted to do a council only to include a finance advisory committee, because we did discuss that option. But I would not recommend doing all of the 5 or 4 standing committees at the same level as advisory committees.
So all of the standing committees, as we know, all the agenda items on those committees would just come straight to council. So the council would have obviously a longer agenda, I guess.
Or more minutes. I mean,
I'm sorry, I don't want to go on a negative road here, but I just think we need to find a way of flattening the organization to make decisions faster. If we can make a decision within a month, that's a good thing. If it takes 2 or 3 months, it's a bad thing. So I think a flatter organization makes more sense. So I still, if I look at the options you're presenting, I definitely prefer Appendix E. I think is Option 1. So that's my 2 cents worth. I think we're saying different things. We're saying the same things. But the advisory committees can certainly, they're consultants. That's what they are. They're advisory committees. We have the best of the council members and the best of the lay members in there, and they are professionals and know what they're talking about and know. So we're getting free advice, and we're getting free advice directly to council. And I like that idea. And I like being able to make decisions faster. I think that's what we need to do, because things just take too long to get through the system. If there's another structure, I'd like to hear about it, but I go for Appendix E or Option 1. I endorse that. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kostanji.
Thank you, through Chair. I'm not a fan of option one because we lose our standing committees. As somebody who sits on many standing committees, those are where our experts in the communities, those are lay members. Some of them have reached out and said that they will not be moving to other committees. So we will lose them. And we lose the residents' voice to a degree with many big, I think Public Works and community services, they're important committees. I think you're also going to lose council because a lot of the advisory committees are held during the day, and that limits other councillors for being on them. So you also lose, you may lose a ward voice on certain advisory committees. I think that having everything come to council, like committee of the whole, we are not experts in everything. And those meetings will take a long time, and we do lose the expert voice in the residents we're not that comparable to. So I did like the idea of losing that layer and have every advisory committees, but I understand if that's not possible. So I would support option 2 and keeping the status quo.
Councillor Howe.
I'm just going to, repeat a couple of things. Councillor DeFlavio, Councillor Costangi, I agree with you. 2, status quo, except there are some fine changes in there that they're suggesting, and I certainly support them. And it at no time eliminates the council of the whole and the budget. So that still is a function of, that's there. But the standing committee, and Councillor Costangi said a whole bunch better than I, gives you that grassroots, that ability to interact and to have some discussions and understand better what's going on. So number 2 would be mine, and with the changes that are suggested in the preamble for number 2.
Councillor Vardy.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, can we put up option 2? Is that just status quo?
Yeah, I think that's option 2.
Okay, well, I'll tell you right now, for me, status quo doesn't work from my perspective because of this. The advisory committees are buried. They're not heard. And I don't see, honestly, how it's more work for clerk's office because someone takes the minutes at all the advisory committees. The only difference is the minutes wouldn't go to the standing committees. They would go directly to council. That's the only difference. But they're not going to be buried anymore. So.
Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I just want to reiterate again that we're still going to have all the opportunity to sit with residents and get their advice on advisory committees. One thing I'd also would like to see more of it is advisory committees coming to council and keeping us up to date with what it is that they're working on, and maybe us hearing a little more firsthand that the advice that they're giving. I think what we're clearly after one round around the horseshoe is of the 3 options, there's one's not even of consideration, but I'm going to agree with Councillor Vardy is that status quo is not really working for me. I think we need to find ways to have workflows and decision-making expedited. But regardless, I think that we're amending one of the 2 options. So I'm going to suggest to not overcomplicate this, that maybe we call the question on whether it is status quo that we are amending or if it's council only that we're going to provide tweaks to. Because going around the table, I kind of like the finance tweak with the council only, personally. But rather than get into the weeds with what tweaks we're making, maybe we might be better suited just 1 or 2 we call the question right now.
Jacob and
Clarification, I'm not comfortable with either of those. So if we have a no vote on an amendment, how, like, will that impact the numbers?
through the chair, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm saying I don't want an amendment on either, if those are the only two options. I don't feel comfortable voting on either of them, so I would be a no vote. So then that leaves 8 votes. So I don't know if that would ruin this.
So the,
First, before voting? Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Mayor. No, I'm not comfortable amending the council only. I like option 1 as presented here.
so through the chair, to answer your question, we would, I think what we're doing is separating out the options. So our first question would be, if you want to read it, and then we will go down the list in order of the report and with the amendments, if there are additional amendments that get brought forward.
Can the options be put on the screen?
It's called 1 or 2 right now, as is, and then amend after.
We just need a minute to get it on the screen.
Yeah,
I don't know if you want
okay.
to- do you
Well,
want-
it's just number 1, that council choose option 1 as the monolith governance and direct staff to implement the required changes. Yeah, why don't we take a 5-minute break and reconvene back at 9, and we'll have this worked out. All right? All right, welcome back. And we're going to vote on option 1, right? Yeah.
Councillor Bradzi and Councillor Sharwa are good with it.
All right, so on the floor, we have Councillor Sharwa as the mover, Councillor Bradzi as the seconder for option 1.
And then we can call it on this one. Can you call it on this one? Option 1.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it again, or? All right, everyone's got the gist of it? All right, so vote on e-scribe. All right, so that's defeated. Now we move to option 2. Moved by Councillor Korstanji, seconder for option 2. Councillor Howe.
Point of clarification. If they're both defeated, does that mean?
I think if they're both defeated, it goes back to staff, right?
Through the chair, if both options are defeated, I would recommend someone put forward a motion, that staff report back on, and we need some direction from council on what you would like to see.
Yeah, we can vote on option 2 now with the e-scribe. All right, so that's defeated. Councillor Sharwa?
Through Mayor Jordan, I'd be happy to move that motion asking for staff to bring this back and to get their opinions.
Councillor Vardy?
Before we do that, it's very awkward talking about this in this very formal structure. Could we not have a, quote, training session where we get together and we kind of talk about this more informally and not so formally? Because I think then we could probably come to some kind of agreement. But we don't have the opportunity to really just sit and discuss with each other, knock ideas back and forth, because it's too formal a forum to be able to get into the nitty-gritty of this. And I think we have to get into the nitty-gritty of this. It's just a suggestion. I'll put it out there. I know that you made a motion before me. That's fine, but I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, so Councillor Sharwa has put a motion on the floor.
She could consider that.
We can either have a seconder. Councillor DeFlavio wants to second it. All right, so basically what's on the floor is that staff report back with other governance options. We need a time frame, so it's not going to be something that's done overnight. So what's, why don't we say September? I think that's fair. Yeah, just Q4, so.
Are they willing to put a workshop on the table?
And are you willing to put a workshop on the table for council? Councilor Shallow?
Through Mayor Jordan, I don't think a workshop's needed. However, if that's what the majority of council wants, then that's fine, but I don't think we necessarily need it.
Councilor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, rather than a workshop, because that's closed, I would suggest something that is more like an open house, where we ask people to come in and have an open discussion. It doesn't have to be on camera. It's just the same way that we would have for, an open house for planning, where people come in and if nobody shows up, then nobody's interested. But where we let people know that we're interested in governance and we want to hear your opinion on it, and we can have that discussion, but not a closed session of council, because I don't think it passes the smell test personally for a closed session. Because what Councilor Vardy is talking about is kind of ironing out the details of a decision before we make a decision, which is kind of like making a decision, which we're not really supposed to do behind closed doors. So I like the idea of an open house where, if members of the committees, other people come in and have their say and say, hey, Nick, I think that you're wrong. We shouldn't have committees anymore, or whatever. Or we can have that discussion at the open house too, but it's an open house where it's open to everybody instead of a closed session, which I don't think meets the Municipal Act requirements.
Yeah, I really think the cleanest way is the motion as it reads now, and coming back in Q4, and I think that makes the most sense. We have a mover and seconder, and it makes it a lot cleaner, and staff can actually do their job and get something back to us. All right, moved by Councillor Charwa, second by Councillor DeFlavio. Resolved that staff be directed to bring back a report back to council regarding other governance structure options by Q4 2024. E-scribe? All right, that's carried. Up next, we have a letter from the Integrity Commissioner. Can I have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor for discussion? Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor Davoli. Discussion.
Through the chair,
Councilor.
no, there is not a presentation or comment on this. It's a letter looking for council direction.
Councillor Howe.
I just, it concerned me a little bit the other night when we did it. And Mr. Maynard, and hopefully I pronounced it properly, in the way I decipher what he's saying, is saying you got to give me something a little bit clearer instead of just kind of open-ended, as though to say, there's a problem there, and then he has to, he goes to look at it. Otherwise, he just sit and watch a council meeting and determine if there is a problem with any of it. I think that's what he's saying, but
Councillor DeVoley.
Mayor Jordan and my fellow councillors, how I actually read this was that when we gave instructions to him as to investigate matters of conduct at council meetings, what he is sharing with us now is that there is a matter under his investigation that has to do with matters of conduct at council meetings. And so he's just asking for clarification as to whether this is truly on a go-forward basis or if it should include the matter he is currently looking at. So I think he's just asking for clarification, whether it's go-forward and does not include the matter currently that he has on his desk, or whether it should include the matter that is on his desk.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, that is correct. He has a file he wants to know that was ongoing before the April 15th council. He wants to know, given that the resolution says in the future, he is looking for direction as to whether he should include the previous case that he was writing or if he should exclude it.
Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. So I'm going to say that we should probably allow this to be grandfathered in, or say the opposite of that. Unless we're going to hear tonight of what this investigation is about, I don't really think that we should be making a decision whether to continue or not to continue. I don't know how we do, just based off the letter we have. So I'm going to say that the rule applies to the investigation that he already had on his desk. So I don't know what the investigation is.
Councillor Sharwell.
Through Mayor Jordan, thank you. So the motion specifically spoke to it being decorum at council meetings in the future, and it was voted on, and there was no mention about anything in progress. So again, council was under the assumption that this was a meeting in the future that we're discussing. And this letter is asking if we can basically not amend it, but go forward with it despite the fact that this says in the future.
Any further questions or comments? Councillor Korstanji.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I don't think it should be grandfathered in because we didn't know about it when we voted. And I don't know if then whoever's involved in it voted on it, if that could be a possible issue, stuff like that. I have a concern with the fact that it was already in progress, and now if it has to start again, the cost of that, I think, that's going to cost even more. So I have a few concerns. I would have liked to have been aware when I voted on it that there was a case in progress and it could have been discussed at the time. So I think that the one that is already in progress should finish, and then going forward, everything should follow what we voted on.
So I'll read the resolution again. So moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor DeVoley. Resolved that the Integrity Commissioner be directed to consider matters of decorum in the following investigations: IC 28126-1123 and IC 28337-1223.
Sorry, clarification?
So voting yes would mean that the Integrity Commissioner would consider previous council minute or meeting, and a no would not grandfather it in.
I just have a question about clarification with this, whether we're discussing this today or whether this actually has to be voted on today in order,
Well, we just-
two-thirds.
I think we vote on it now.
No, I mean, do we have to do a two-thirds to suspend the rules, or is this a notice of motion? Like, how does that work?
Through
It's
the
just a
chair-
report.
yeah. It's a discussion.
It's a discussion report, so it can be voted on right now.
But the resolution, sorry, wasn't attached, so I wasn't sure what we were doing with this today.
All right, so it's right in the report, so, yeah, it's right there. So I'm just, you can vote on eScribe.
Sorry, where does it say this? Because I only have the letter that was attached to my agenda. I don't have this at all. It's not on my eScribe.
Through the chair, it's within the letter, it's asking in the last paragraph, I request clarification from council as to whether the ongoing matter I have referenced should be considered to fall under council's above noted April 15th direction to my office. So the vote is to provide the integrity commissioner direction on whether he should include the two specific cases in with the new direction of council, or if it should not be, if it will not be considered. Council decorum issues will not be considered on those specific two cases he had prior to the April 15th date.
All right, I think the eScribe vote is open. All right, that is carried. Up next, we have Councillor Charwa's notice of motion from last meeting. It's up for discussion. We have Councillor Charwa as a mover. We need a seconder. Councillor Korstanji. Discussion? Councillor Charwa.
Through Mayor Jordan, thank you. So this is a motion that, a notice of motion that I brought forward 2 months ago. So I followed procedure. I put this in prior to our council meeting. It sat there. I introduced it as a notice of motion, sat there for 2 weeks, brought it as a motion. When we were supposed to discuss it, it was lifted by Councillor DeVoley, voted on to remove it. I put it back on, sat there for 2 weeks as a notice of motion, 2 months.
Right, I'm just going to give a point of clarification there. Probably why you met with all those roadblocks is that, certainly in my opinion, it's totally out of our jurisdiction. We don't, this is a provincial issue.
Point of order, you don't have the right to speak on this. This is.
Well, I think I do, so.
This is, yes, however.
If you want to call a point of order against the chair and you want a clarification, I'm well to vote with it, but I don't feel that long-term care is a provincial issue. It's not a municipal issue.
However, discussions in the procedural bylaw say that they're open discussions. So items, whether or not you feel that they're, of interest to you, it doesn't really matter because this is something that council is deciding, not just the mayor. And it's not really up to you to have that opinion and to discuss it as council because you're supposed to be neutral.
I was just providing a fact, so.
Okay, so anyhow, as I was saying, this is something that a constituent brought to my attention, gave me a call, brought it to my attention. I did look it up and see that we do need some long-term care being allocated in Grimsby. So trying to think forward for our aging population, and I would like to see this move forward.
Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I just want to ask a question to the councillor. When you say the town investigate partnership opportunities with the province of Ontario to take possession of property in Grimsby, what do you mean by take possession of property in Grimsby?
I would just say that there are desirable areas in Grimsby that could be used for long-term care. I'm not going to say those addresses, however, there are several, and I think we should investigate that, especially if long-term care is a priority in Grimsby, which with our aging population, it should be.
Just to follow up on that, are you talking about purchasing property, expropriation of property?
Through you, Chair, no, this is just a discussion to get things on the floor and then see what happens.
I think we all support long-term care homes. I just, whether or not this is a redundant motion for the business of the town of Grimsby, and I'm going to say that it is.
Councillor DeVoli.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jordan, and to my fellow councillors. I had the opportunity a very long time ago to actually sit on the board of a long-term care home, and I would be happy to share with you that it is a very expensive venture to get into. And there are definitely experts who work in this field who know what is involved in it and the cost of it. I will say that, it is now a region of Niagara mandate and responsibility to provide them, and as well as the province of Ontario to issue licenses as they see needed. It is easy to jump to the conclusion that we should have more long-term care beds, and I will speak to that first, but having gone through COVID and seen what happened in those long-term care beds, I don't know about the rest of you, but my goal in life is to make sure I never end up in one of those, or for as short a time as possible. But nevertheless, this particular motion on the floor deals with an area that is not within our expertise. It's not within the expertise of our staff to provide recommendations to us as to how we would do it, what the expenses would be, and so on. It is not an area of expertise of any of us who sit around this horseshoe neither. Truly, I think if this motion were to go anywhere, it should be to, kick it up the chain of command, I'll call it, to the region of Niagara or to our province of Ontario to look into further. But I really believe it is not within our mandate or responsibility, and I could not support us getting into it in any way, shape, and form at this time.
Seeing no further questions, moved by Councillor Charwa, second by Councillor Korstanji. Whereas the Town of Grimsby Council 2022 to 2026 identified a high quality of life, specifically improving health and safety of residents as strategic priorities, and whereas the Town of Grimsby currently has 3 licensed long-term care homes, providing 134 licensed beds for community members in need of long-term care, and whereas Ontario Health on March 4th, 2024 reported a shortfall of 430 waitlisted for a long-term care home in Grimsby, and whereas the Town of Grimsby is experiencing significant population growth, which will continue to strain the resources of the healthcare system, including Killian Lodge, Deer Park Villa, Shalom Manor, and West Lincoln Memorial Hospital, and whereas the deficit in licensed care beds will continue to increase as population in proportion to population growth, and whereas the province of Ontario has responded to the needs of the community with the rebuild of the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital, and whereas the province of Ontario can continue to show great care for our community with the construction of new long-term care home, and whereas there may be potential to acquire property in Grimsby that offers ideal location for an addition of a long-term care home, therefore be it resolved that the Town of Grimsby communicate its desire to investigate partnership opportunities with the province of Ontario to take possession of property in Grimsby with the intention to construct a new long-term care home at the location. Be it further resolved that the notice of interest be circulated to Samuel Oosterhoff, Niagara West MPP, Niagara Regional Public Health, the Honourable Sylvia Jones, Minister of Health and Deputy Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Raymond Sung Jun Cho, Minister for Seniors and Accessibility, and the Honorable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario. Councillor Frakes asked for a recorded vote. And that's defeated. Up next, Councillor Korstanji's notice of motion from the last meeting is now up for discussion. Councillor Korstanji has moved it. We need a seconder. Councillor DeFlavio. Discussion? Councillor Korstanji.
Thank you, through you, Chair. This is pretty simple, actually. Our code of conduct doesn't give remedial measures at all. In other municipalities, such as Port Hope, there is a list of remedial measures provided by the Integrity Commissioner or corrective action that gives a little bit more opportunity, as opposed to in the situation of, you know, suspending pay or just making, we actually had not really much of an option. So, for instance, a few things: provide a written or verbal apology, return property or make reimbursements of its value or money spent, be removed from or not appointed to membership on a committee of council. I mean, these things are decided upon with the partnership of the Integrity Commissioner. So I just want to bring forward that staff work with the Integrity Commissioner to provide us with some remedial measures in these cases, so that we are not sitting here at council for 2 hours deciding something. I mean, we have the Integrity Commissioner, who is the third party that decides, you know, who is right and who is wrong. It'd be nice to have sort of a cohesive, clear-cut process on, you know, what the remedial measures are, and give options of that to sort of correct behavior. So that's just my thoughts where that was coming from.
Thank you, Councillor Korstanji. Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I got to say, at the last Integrity Commissioner thing, I felt very much the same way, trying to think of what is a reprimand that we're actually allowed to implement. But I guess to actually outline a process, I'm going to say that every council, I think, is going to kind of operate and approach this differently. So I think we kind of just need to look at, like you have, what other councils have done in the past. But even for something at us, maybe we look at something like the removal from a committee post or deputy mayor term, but because going outside of that, outside an apology letter, there's really nothing that actually has any sort of teeth sinking into the skin, for lack of a better expression. So that's just kind of my thoughts. I think it has to be incumbent on the council to make the reprimands. Because we could set a list of things that we think are appropriate, but then the next council might see it completely different or operate differently too. So even the deputy mayor's suggestion that I just had, next council, they could just turn out and elect one person, and then there isn't everybody has their turn. So I think we kind of got to approach this on a piecemeal basis, personally.
Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I love the idea, Councillor Korstanji. I think that discipline should be progressive, and if the purpose of having an Integrity Commissioner is to curb behavior, then there has to be multiple options. So giving the Integrity Commissioner, we're going to trust that they're going to make the recommendation, you know, if they see it as something that needs to be reprimanded strongly, where pay should be removed, then I'm sure they will recommend that. But giving them other options, just gives them a variety of different suggestions that they can make. So I love the idea. I think that this is something that we should have probably implemented in the first place. So it's not everything's a nuclear option that way, and it's not an all or nothing every time. The goal is to get people to act the way that counselors should act, and if that is the true goal, the same way that if you were disciplining your child, the first time they do something, it's not going to be as strict. It's meant to be a learning experience. So you might give them verbal feedback the first time, and the next time it might be a little bit more, whatever that looks like for every individual parent. I think that giving multiple options gives the Integrity Commissioner a lot more leeway and a lot more flexibility in what they recommend. So is your recommendation, Councilor Cristangi, that staff come up with a list of options and that then we vote on it further as a result of that, or that we just give staff that opportunity to bring that forward? Oh, it's just the Integrity Commissioner. Okay, apologies. Yeah. It says staff in consultation with the Integrity Commissioner. So the Integrity Commissioner would bring something forward, and then we'd have to vote on that, I would assume, before it gets implemented.
That we have to suggest the reprimands when I asked IC.
I think most municipalities work in conjunction with the Integrity Commissioner because I believe he has to approve it. It has to be under the Municipal Act. So it would be staff working in conjunction with what he would recommend.
Yeah, so it would still require us to pass it. I should have said that on with my mic on, so yeah.
Councillor Vardy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm supportive of this. I think it's good to have, a sort of menu of options or possibilities that would suit ameliorating the problem or making things better. So that would be, I'm certainly open to that. I'm open to staff looking at maybe what other municipalities are doing. And, we can't have like a Game of Thrones walk of shame. Our counselor, public flogging, they'll probably get panned. But having some options that can help fix the problem instead of just punish the problem, or in addition to punish the problem, I think would be a good idea.
Councillor DeVoley.
I would just like to ask everyone the current resolution says with an answer no later than the end of Q2. It is already almost the end of May. So that would mean the end of June. So really my question for our town manager and clerk, is that enough time? Because realistically, that's only about 5 weeks. I would like to make a friendly amendment and say, the end of August or something like that, if by the end of Q3.
I've just amended it there to end of
Yeah,
Q3,
I think
given
we
the
need a
time.
bit more time to really do some good research on this, and so I would be happy with the end of Q3.
All right. Moved by Councillor Cristangi, second by Councillor DeFlavio, where the municipal council and committee meetings are analogous to a workplace for elected officials and staff, subject to the same expectations of professional conduct as any other workplace. And whereas inappropriate behavior in these environments may give rise to the formal code of conduct complaints, and whereas these formal complaints may be determined by the Integrity Commissioner to be a contravention of the town's code of conduct, and whereas the code of conduct and the Municipal Act only provide penalties, that being a reprimand or a suspension of remuneration for contraventions, and whereas remedial measures are not provided by the Code of Conduct and may represent a more appropriate course of action to address certain contraventions, and whereas numerous municipalities include remedial measures within their codes of conduct as a best practice to overcome conduct or performance deficiencies. Therefore, be it resolved that staff, in consultation with the Integrity Commissioner, draft an amendment to the appropriate sections of the Code of Conduct to implement remedial measures as an alternative resolution option for contraventions. Be it further resolved that the draft update to the Code of Conduct Bylaw 20-74 be brought forth to council no later than the end of Q3 2024. All in favor? And that's carried. Next, Councillor Shawa has put forward a notice of motion regarding vacant unit tax. Councillor Shawa, please read your motion.
Through Mayor Jordan, sorry, I'll just pull it up here. So it's a vacant unit tax. Whereas the town of Grimsby 2022 to 2026 identified a high quality of life as a strategic priority, and whereas the town of Grimsby recognizes the pressing need to address housing affordability and availability within our community, and whereas neighboring municipalities such as Hamilton have successfully implemented measures to address the issue of vacant properties through the introduction of a vacant unit tax, whereas ensuring housing availability and affordability is a priority for the well-being and prosperity of the community, therefore be it resolved that the town of Grimsby, 1, directs municipal staff to conduct a thorough review of the implementation of a vacant unit tax similar to that of Hamilton or another neighboring municipality as a means to encourage the efficient use of residential properties and to alleviate housing pressures within our community. The review will include the implementation process and potential impacts of a vacant unit tax within the context of Grimsby, including but not limited to legal considerations, administrative requirements, and potential revenue generation. Number 2, present the review at the Town of Grimsby Council meeting on Monday, July 8th for adoption. I acknowledge that this notice of motion will be given consideration at the June 3rd, 2024 Council meeting.
All right, up next, can I have a mover and seconder for the correspondence? Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Bradsey. Resolved that the following correspondence be received. Town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, federal infrastructure funding, Town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, transforming the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Basin, Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, completion of land acquisitions in Niagara Region and Haldimand County. All in favor? That's carried. Up next, Councillor Frake has requested to endorse correspondence from the Multi-Municipal Energy Working Group. Councillor Frake's the mover. Councillor Bradsey is the seconder. Any discussion? Councillor Howe.
When you look at, there's a very small group that have difficulty with the turbines. Turbines are sustainable. It's what we want to have, sustainable energy, and they don't want to have it. So, but I want to support this. It's a very small group. Okay, same thing. Almost said that, but I figured that wouldn't go over.
All right, moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Bradsey, whereas the Independent Electrical System Operator, the IESO, has proposed to move forward with 3 RFPs where new wind turbine projects can receive a contract from the IESO, and whereas people living near existing wind turbines result considerable impact on their lives due to noise and other emissions from the wind turbines, and whereas there are gaps in the enforcement of key terms of the renewable energy approvals considering existing projects relative to the noise standards and resolution of complaints, and whereas municipal approval is required to locate one of these projects in the town of Grimsby, therefore be it resolved that council does not support the establishment of any new wind turbine projects within the municipality. Be it further resolved that the IESO be directed to advise potential applicants of this resolution. Councillor Vardy?
Oh, sorry.
If we vote yes, then we're saying we do not want these wind turbines in Grimsby. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor DeFlavio?
Thank you, Mayor. So wasn't this a motion to lift? Grimsby's not mentioned in the original motion by the IESO, right?
Through the chair, on the agenda, there's Councillor Frake asked to pull a letter of correspondence, the Multi-Municipal Energy Working Group letter, and on page 3, they have circulated a draft resolution that they're asking municipalities to approve. So Grimsby specifically is not mentioned in the letter, but they're asking municipalities to.
So I can clarify for members of council that the study was already done, and the town of Grimsby is not an appropriate spot for wind turbines anyway. So I'm not sure what the purpose of this. Anyway, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. All right, so the resolution's been read. Councillor DeFlavio, or DeFoli?
Thank you. I know it's getting late. Could I just ask Councillor DeFlavio to expand upon his comments?
If it's okay with you, Chair, all I can say is that there were when the wind turbines were put in West Lincoln and along that corridor, the wind studies were done, and there was and the indication showed that no wind turbines would ever logically be placed in Grimsby. There's no place to put them in Grimsby, and the grid lines are not in to put them in anyway. That being said, we had a previous discussion about what is municipal jurisdiction and what is provincial jurisdiction, and this is not one of those things that's under our jurisdiction. So the people that, anyway, the study was done years ago. It's not an appropriate place for it.
Right. Yeah, so just for clarification, a yes vote means council does not support it, and no vote means council supports the IESO. All right, all in favor? You know what, let's do E-Scrub. All right, that's been approved. All right, can I have a mover and seconder for bylaw 2441? Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Vardy. Moved by Councillor Frake, second by Councillor Vardy. Resolved that leave be given to introduce bylaw 24-41 and the same be read a first time, considered and passed. All in favor? That's carried. Next council meeting is scheduled for June 3rd, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. Now, can I have a mover and seconder to adjourn to closed session to discuss the Art Gallery Special Purpose Advisory Committee appointments and the Ombudsman preliminary report? Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor Howe. Moved by Councillor Bradzi, second by Councillor Howe. Resolved that council adjourn to closed session under Section 2392B Municipal Act, where a closed meeting is held if the subject matter being considered is personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Section 2393B of the Municipal Act, where a closed session meeting is held under if the subject matter being considered is an ongoing investigation respecting the municipality, a local board, or a municipality controlled corporation by the ombudsman appointed under the Ombudsman Act. An ombudsman referred to in subsection 22313 brackets 1 of the Municipal Act, or the investigator referred to in subsection 2392 brackets 1. All in favor to go into closed? That's carried. secondary